My name is Elvia Macias Perez. I'm a professor here at Folsom Lake College, and this is my buddy to my right, Dr. B.J. Snowden, happens to be my dean and also my friend. But we are here to first welcome our president, Whitney Yamamura, who is going to give the official welcome, and we're so thankful to him for his support, saying yes, and being here. So take it away, Whitney.
Thank you. Welcome to Folsom Lake College. I'm very privileged and honored to be the third president of the college. So we have wonderful, beautiful facilities, this beautiful room. I want to thank all of the, it takes a village to do anything. And so all of the work, the organization, the germination of the idea, I'm so excited that we could host here. So anyone who was involved in the organization and preparation, please raise your hand and be acknowledged. Stand. Again, I'm very grateful that we could bring conversations together at this campus, and I'm so delighted to be able to participate. So welcome, and let's proceed on.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Whitney. Someone asked me about the speakers and how it was that this illustrious group of people who I will introduce in just a little bit, but how it was that they came here. How was I tied to that? And my first response, without question, without thinking about it, was, it's my family. And as I drove home that evening, I thought, why did I say that? And again, that family word came up. And I'll tell you why they're my family. We've been shoulder to shoulder. In fact, that's how one of us met in the Women's March, marching for women's rights, for social equality, for education. With some of them, I've sat around the strategy table thinking about how to open doors, how to keep the American dream alive. If I've been on the national floor talking about immigration reform and Black Lives Matter, another one was on another floor speaking about DACA and education. One that will shortly arrive. With them, we just kick back. Come Saturday, Friday, we just kick back, sometimes bend over and laugh until our ribs hurt, and maybe celebrate a game or two of bocce ball. So this is my family. Another thing, the way I got them here was a call. I need you. We need you. And they responded. That's what family does. They respond. But I didn't bring them here because they're my family. I brought them here because they're very, very special people. They are expansive people. These are people who have gone to the mountain and back. They've reached their goals. They've reached all their career goals. They've gotten there, come back, and it's time to move on. And they move from the form physics, the physics of form, into the physics of spirit. That's not weird. Physics of spirit is like love, where you give, and the more you give, the more you have. These are people whose cup runneth over, and they're here because they are abundant, and they're here to give. And the more they give, the more they get back. I tell my students, don't miss the party. Don't miss the party that is life. They are the party. And we've brought the party here for you today. They will be successful. This presentation will be successful for us, for them. But it's successful for you if you open your hearts, open your mind, and listen to what they have to say. Their story is not new. Their story is the one that our country was based on. All of us, some of us brought by force, but some of us were here to begin with. But all of us have that immigrant story. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. And so when that immigrant story, that foundation, the crux, the foundation of the United States of America, when we see it, that light not maybe burning as bright as we'd like to, it's the giants. They're these expansive spirits that come forward and go, wait a minute. This great country was founded on that very dream. It can't go out. And so that's why they're here, to remind us of that. I'm not here to do a long speech. I want to introduce them. And the first ones that I would like to introduce is mi hermano Cesar Moreno Perez. Oh, and Jonathan Jays Green. Where's Jonathan? And before you start, Cesar, come here with me for a moment. I want you to look at our faces. We're family. You can tell, right? You can tell. We're a family, and we felt it the moment we met each other. And so, before they start, we're going to set the stage a little bit with a short poem. So if you'll permit us that. The RCAF, anybody know about the RCAF? Hey. The RCAF was a group of undesirables, college undesirables. Back in the day, I tell my students, I'm 187 years old, that's all I have to say, so you do the math. But we were the undesirables that saw a need for change, for social justice back in the day. And so, being on the ends, we didn't even make it to the hippie group. We didn't even make it there. But what we did is we began to tell our story in artistic ways. Some of us through drama, and Teatro Campesino was born. The Valdez brothers, you can hear them today if you go to the movie Coco. They're the voices behind Coco. They are the artists who painted murals, such as Esteban Villa, Juanicio Orozco. They are Jose Montoya, who's a nationally acclaimed poet. And the RCAF means the Royal Chicano Air Force, which is made out of Adobe planes. It was a takeoff from the Royal Canadian Air Force, which we did not make. So we made our own Air Force, this creative Air Force of humanity. And Tom Goff, would you join me? Tom Goff is brave enough to ride those planes with me. And he will read a poem to set the stage, and I will follow with a short one, and hopefully gives you an idea of where we were and where we are now. Tom.
Gracias. So this is a poem in tribute to the memory of the great Jose Montoya. And so two quick things. First, this poem draws upon a poem of Jose's. And second, in his tenure as Poet Laureate of Sacramento, Jose Montoya liked to assume that his real role, his mission, was not that of Poet Laureate, but of Poet Lowrider. So that's the title of this poem, Poet Lowrider for Jose Montoya. I never knew enough Spanish to feel I could hang altogether with you, Jose Montoya. My 2 years in Mexico, hell, totalmente insufficient to let me call you cuate, compadre, amigo en la poesía. Los días supersónicos del Royal Chicano Air Force may have seemed lost in el pasado, yet there you were, painting, teaching, crafting the wily poems you delivered in that laconic speech rhythm of yours, flirting with the false imagen of just un tipo mexicano, sly dogging subversion. Desert submariner, tal vez one deadly sand-skimming disco volante, needing no Jaime Bond to make thunderball of the stereotype. You read for your grand poetic festival, Flor y Canto, read for our infinitely small, quizás select, assembly of poem spirits at Unitarian Universalist Society of Sacramento, bestowing forever your troubadour soul. Oh, to hear you once more recite your poem on the poor Diablo truck ramming El Capitolio, N Street side, with that fine detail of you in your car and the rookie cop telling you to flip a bitch. Poet Laureate, Poet Lowrider, tell me you're coming back somehow to read at Sacramento Centro de la Poesía, at Luna's Cafe, in cualquiera fountain of lattes tibios you care to name, and I will flip a bitch there in my tracks, make instant U-turn so as not to miss your turn.
Gracias, Tom. And I leave you with this in terms of the RCAF. Once an RCAF member, you never stop being one. So, and we're each different. El baile is this Saturday, loca. Yeah, but I can't go. I can't cover la mugre under my nails, ni las grietas por el fil en mis manos. Mañana we graduate, and Compa Rudy's making silkscreen t-shirts to commemorate such an auspicious event. We deserve it, ese. As incredible as they find it. We graduated hasta con extracurricular activities. We painted murals under the I-5 overpass. Córrele, ahí viene la chota. We boycotted La Safeway. We marched with Cesar from Salinas to the Capitol, from Fresno to Sacra, hasta de la Stockton y la Fruit Ridge Road al Capitolio. No te cuelgues, compa. ¿Y ahora qué? Before, my nails were too dirty, and now they're too clean. Don't waste the scholarship on her. They just get pregnant and they go nowhere. And now, flashy güera, who does she think she is? You match to match. Is that Polo? Y antes, que naca. They dress like that? Look at her, she doesn't match. Poverty never does, ese. It doesn't look good. It isn't pretty, ni es Polo. Antes, they thought they saw you. Now they don't see you at all, unless it's the self-made, pre-packaged novela about you. ¿Y qué? We go on. We are raza, the transcendent spirit that lives outside of time and place, that gives evidence to si se puede, yes we can. We are raza, de todos colores, llena de ideales y progreso. We are the pure potentiality, untamed, in all gustos and sizes and backgrounds and dreams, undetainable, like childbirth. We are la raza, your human family, those you claim and those you don't. We are the keepers de la Lady Liberty. We hold her up and straighten her crown. We polish her torch to keep the light bright. Para todos. We are la raza, no more and no less than this country's great promise, the American dream. With that, mis hermanos, please take it away, Cesar and Jonathan, and do your thing. Welcome.
Thank you, Edia. Good morning. Buenos dias. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to be here. Happy the mic? Okay. All right. So it is an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you, to have this important and timely conversation about what is happening in this country with the treatment of immigrants and the scapegoating, the demonizing of our community. It's a beautiful campus you all have here. When Elvia and I had a conversation closer to the end of last year about, again, what was happening with the increased enforcement, with the insecurity that our students were living every single day, that we know as educators, when our students walk into our campus and into our classrooms, that there's a heavy burden on their shoulders, right? We cannot ignore that the increased enforcement by ICE and this administration is impacting the educational success of our students. And it is our responsibility, our moral obligation as educators throughout the continuum of public education, regardless of where we're at, in the system to be able to stand up and support our students in this time of great need. So I'm going to share a brief video, and I'm having trouble putting the video back on. Okay, here we go. To sort of put into context, again, what our students are living these days. You know, I have been crisscrossing the country for a couple of years now, working with educators, with community partners, with just concerned citizens, with what they can do to be able to support their students and the families. And so the video is called Wake Me Up by Ala Blanc. Again, this to put into context what are these experiences by some of our students and their families.
Feeling my way through the darkness, guided by a beating heart. I can't tell where the journey will end, but I know where to start. They tell me I'm too young to understand. They say I'm caught up in a dream. Life will pass me by if I don't open up my eyes. Well, that's fine by me. So wake me up when it's all over, when I'm wiser and I'm older. All this time I was finding myself, and I didn't know I was lost. So wake me up when it's all over, when I'm wiser and I'm older. All this time I was finding myself, and I didn't know I was lost. I tried carrying the weight of the world, but I only have two hands. I hope I get the chance to travel the world, but I don't have any plans. I wish that I could stay forever this young, not afraid to close my eyes. Well, life's a game made for everyone, and love is the prize. So wake me up when it's all over, when I'm wiser and I'm older. All this time I was finding myself, and I didn't know I was lost. So wake me up when it's all over, when I'm wiser and I'm older. All this time I was finding myself, and I
I'm waiting for somebody to wake me up. I'm waiting for somebody to wake me up from the nightmare that we are living every single day. The nightmare that our students are living every single day. We cannot stand idly by while this administration goes after our community. We have to be responsible, again, for every single student that steps foot into our campus and the families that are contributing to our communities. What I saw in that video is a depiction of the journey, the sacrifice, and the struggle of our immigrant community that's seeking the American dream. They make the dangerous journey into the United States, fleeing warlike conditions in their countries of origin for a better dream. That video shows families being ripped apart, separated by the cruel immigration policies. But it also shows, again, the courage and courageous conversations that families are having now. It used to be the families would talk about immigration when their children were much older, when they were in high school, when they were planning to go to college, or when they were trying to get a job for the first time. That's when the conversation around immigration and status first took place. But now, that conversation is taking place at a much, much younger stage of children's lives. And all of this, again, impacts the child's livelihood, right? It impacts our communities. And it takes me, and I apologize, I'm a bit, disorganized in thoughts, because a lot has happened in DC within the last 2 weeks. I wish I was going to be, initially when I thought about, when we were planning to have this conversation, I knew that what was taking place in Congress. I knew that we were going to have conversations to pass a bill that was going to provide, a legislative long-term solution for our dreamers, for our documented individuals. And so back in December, had some hope that I was going to come here and it was going to be a whole different conversation, right? I was going to talk about how this administration finally was responsive to all the residents of this country. But that didn't happen, right? 2 weeks ago, on February 15th, the Senate once again failed to pass a legislative fix for our dreamers. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that national landscape. So again, I apologize in advance, but I'm just a little bit frustrated. I'm frustrated. But as somebody that I recognize my own privilege, right? My privilege to know that I do not know what it feels like every single day that our undocumented students are walking to class in fear that they may be detained by local police, or they may be encounter an immigration ICE officer, and that encounter will lead to their deportation. Or that when they get home, their parents are no longer going to be there. So that's why I say like those of you in here that come from a place of privilege, please understand the hardship that your students are going through. Let's empathize a little bit more with their situations. And it's not that they are coming from a place of entitlement. No. It is, again, that we must recognize that we have a failed, broken immigration system that is reaping benefits and exploiting workers. And that is a conversation that not too many people want to have, but that we need to acknowledge the corporations that are profiting out of the backs of our communities. And that when an individual stands up to those corporations that are exploiting them, they are then ICE is called upon them. So we need to acknowledge again that we need to be better allies in this work. And not just allies. I think we've come in our terminology a little bit. When I talk to our partners, they're like, we need you to be disruptors in this work. It's no longer just, doing the sign-on. It's how can we actively, engage in this work. And so that's why I want to thank my hermana Elvia. I want to thank BJ and the committee. I want to thank the Folsom Lake Community College for opening its doors, its campus, to have this conversation. That again, it's not happening in all the parts of the country where it needs to happen. But again, we must acknowledge that our students need to hear us. They need to be able to hear us be unapologetic about this work and the work that we are doing. For the past last week, I was in Puerto Rico, helping families who have been, still recovering from the devastation, the catastrophic devastation that happened with Hurricane Maria. Right, 53% of the people in the island still have no power. Right, educators are teaching, based on just whatever light is provided throughout the day. But that's a natural disaster. That was a catastrophic natural disaster. What we are living here, what our students are living here, that is a man-made disaster, right? And it happened when President Donald Trump terminated the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, right? So our responsibility is to make sure that we are setting the record straight. So that when we hear the media news outlets saying we are only going after the bad hombres, the criminals, the rapists, the drug dealers, that we set the record straight and point to the individuals that are being caught on enforcement action raids that had no other offense but being in this country undocumented. And let's remember, being in the US without documentation is a civil, not a criminal act. So like these individuals here whose lives were upended, there are hundreds of stories, similar stories. So I implore you again to join us in setting the record straight. I'm not going to go through their individual cases because I was reminded of a time that we have, and I want to make sure that I get through as much information as possible so that we have a rich dialogue, because it's about having dialogue, that we have a frank conversation, right? It's not about sugarcoating the reality, because then when we do that, right, we're not really doing our students and our communities a service, right? And I remind our folks in every training that I do, it's not about us being reckless either. Don't be reckless with this work. Don't ever tell a student or a family member that they're gonna be okay, because we cannot guarantee anybody with 100% certainty that they are not gonna be detained, that they are not gonna be put in deportation proceedings, and that they're not gonna be separated from their families. All we can do is make sure that our communities have the information that they need to protect themselves, so that they know if they ever do encounter or find themselves in that situation with an immigration ICE agent, that they're able to know what rights they do have, right? And that we as educators, again, regardless of the continuum where we're at, that we know what are our rights and what are the rights of our students. And with that also begins, again, how do we change this national landscape? We know that every single year, 100,000 students graduate from high school. 100,000 undocumented students graduate from high school. And we know the hardships that they will face when they want to go to college. There are currently over 240,000 undocumented students in post-secondary education. 240,000. The last survey that came out, we know that there are 16.7 million Americans that have at least one family member in their household who is undocumented. So when we talk about the increased enforcement, we know it's not just targeting one individual. It targets families, it targets communities as a whole. We know that there are close to 6 million children, US-born children, who have at least one parent who is undocumented. We also know that there are 1.5 million US-born children whose parents are here on temporary protected status. And I'm going to provide an update on where we're at with TPS, because we don't talk about that, but that's a community that's also been under attack. We're also in tax season. Hardly do we ever hear about the economic contributions of our undocumented community to our societies. But I want you to remember one figure, $11.64 billion. $11.64 billion. The Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, ITEP.org. Download that report, it breaks it down by state. But again, help us correct the misinformation when somebody talks, immigrants are a social drain to our social services. They must talk about the economic contributions as well that they do not reap any benefits from. In California, there are 3 million undocumented immigrants in this state. Their contributions, $3.1 billion. Again, $3.1 billion. How many times have you heard that in the news? With a show of hands, nobody. So we need to make sure that we again are pointing to these facts. And we know that if there was a pathway to adjust status, they would contribute an additional $454 million to the local economy. So I'm going to begin with what DACA is. And that's just a brief primer because there was a lot of misinformation that led to the termination of DACA, right? The Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals that was established under President Obama and that was launched announced on June of 2012, provided work authorization, renewable for 2 years, right? Some protection from deportation, but it allowed individuals to obtain a social security number, work authorization, obtain a driver's license, or a state ID. It was never a pathway to citizenship or a green card. You know how many times I heard somebody say all they want is a citizenship, or they're now in the front of the line to get a green card. Again, DACA was never meant to be that, and it is not that. It did not give them access to public benefits, and it did not extend to anybody else but the individual who qualified. There were strict requirements to obtain DACA. It wasn't a free-for-all. It wasn't just like anybody could get in line. No, you had to have been in the country for a specific date, be under a certain age, pay a fee, pass a background check, but they don't talk about any of that, right? When they paint our community, right, they vilify this program that was helping, again, individuals that were brought here as children, that went to our public schools and graduated, worked hard, with an opportunity to contribute more fully to their communities. It meant that DACA, that people could drive, live, and work without that unconscionable fear that they were going to be detained and deported. We know that there are close to 800,000 individuals with deferred action. 20,000 of them bilingual educators throughout this country. We know that we have a teacher shortage. So now you imagine pulling them away from those classrooms. I worry about this figure. The 473,000 children are students who did not yet qualify for DACA, but that were aging into the program. In September 15th, when the president announced his termination, what message were we sending these children? What hope were we giving these children, right? One of our national partners, the United We Dream, who is leading a lot of this work and this movement, they have a hotline, a crisis hotline. And heart-wrenching to hear the stories of children, students calling with thoughts of because they felt they had no other choice or alternative. And that's why I say we can't sit idly by. We have to educate, inform our communities, and make sure that our students do not lose hope, because we are going to continue to fight. We're going to continue to do everything that we can in our power to ensure that they see a bright future, that they don't give up, and that they don't take their life. We know that individuals with DACA live in all 50 states and territories of the United States. We know the economic contributions in California alone. Again, individuals with DACA contribute $11.6 billion to the economy. But when DACA was terminated on September 5th, when the announcement came out, it gave individuals a strict window, right? It said, if you have DACA that's expiring between September and March 5th of 2018, you have a month. You have a month to renew your DACA, right? At that time, we knew that 200,000 individuals met that threshold, right? When the deadline passed, when October 5th passed, we knew that there were already 40,000 individuals who did not renew their DACA for whatever reason, right? Some of it, and the fear, and the one that we have to, and the biggest challenge now with this current landscape is that fear. Again, there is a risk to applying to renew your DACA, right? Since the announcement, 20,000 immigrant youth have already lost protections from DACA, 20,000. Some of you have heard about the nationwide injunctions, right? The injunction that was announced in January of this year by the district judge in San Francisco, and just a couple of weeks ago, the district judge in New York. What that did is provide additional time, right, for our individuals, our immigrant youth whose DACA expired, right, whose DACA expired, they have time to renew, right? So, and this is why the information time is a big, it's confusing, because we heard the president announce this termination on September 5th. It was a phase out. Nobody could, there's not new applications, right? Again, this is just about those that currently have deferred action for childhood arrivals, DACA, right? But this is what I want you to know about this, about what the injunction means and what we could be doing as faculty or administrators or community leaders, right? It's informing their communities, again, that DACA, their work authorization, their EAD number is valid until it is expired, right? That if they didn't meet that threshold of September to March, and they had, because we have members that are teachers whose EAD expired in July or in June, so they already knew that they were not going to be able to renew, right? Because they didn't meet that, again, the arbitrary short window of time that the administration gave them. But what these injunctions have done, it allowed those individuals whose DACA expired, right, in April, in May, in June, with another opportunity of hope to renew, right? But again, in order for you to qualify for renewal of DACA, you must not have left the US on or after August 15th of 2012 without first having been granted advance parole. Right? Because again, DACA allowed limited opportunity for individuals who obtained advance parole to leave the country. They must have continuously lived in the US and from the initial time that they requested DACA, and they may not have committed any criminal offenses, right? But we still ask, and again, that individuals who fall in these situations, that they seek legal advice and legal counsel, right? By all means, none of our literature and our materials and this presentation and our dialogue is meant to be legal advice, because that's reckless, right? We want to make sure that individuals are seeking credible legal advice. So remember again that no new application for DACA is being accepted, but that individuals should not wait. They should, if their DACA is expiring now, to seek legal advice to make sure, because we don't know how long, the injunction is going to be in place. What I do know is that immediately after the district judge in January issued its injunction, DOJ immediately said that they were going to appeal that decision. They were going to circumvent the Ninth Circuit Court, and they were going to go straight to the Supreme Court, right? On Monday, the Supreme Court met to discuss the cases that we're going to review. This one didn't come up. They're meeting again today. I haven't gotten any notices, but in terms of whether or not they're going to review it. But we know, again, that this is going all the way to the Supreme Court. But in the meantime, again, our students have a window of time. But again, it is that fear. I talk to members and students, and they just say, Cesar, this administration already has my information. What guarantee do I have that they're not going to come after me in my home or my community or at school? we don't have 100% guarantee, right? So where were any questions on DACA? Or should we take questions or wait till the very end? So briefly then on what TPS is, right? Temporary Protective Status, which is also very similar to the functioning of DACA. It allowed individuals an opportunity to get work authorization, right? EAD numbers. It is not a pathway again to citizenship. So recently, right? So TPS for the longest, and there's close to 400,000 immigrants in the U.S. who are here with TPS. And TPS, again, it served a lifeline for many whose countries were ravished by war, a natural disaster, right? So individuals from Haiti, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, Somalia. But some news, again, started being announced from this administration that they started terminating TPS. El Salvador, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Sudan, all those TPSs have been terminated. So that means that those individuals who had that have to make what's called their exit strategy, their exit plan. Because we, as the administration has singled out, we are no longer in need of their work or contributions into our community. They need to return to their country. And we've already heard from this administration that all the other countries who currently have TPS, that their fate will be one very similar, right? Where that program is going to be phased out. And it's important to know that because, again, what options would these individuals have but to go into our communities at underground, right? They're going to, because they have built, some of them have been here for 20 years, 30 years. They have built their lives here. Their children have grown up here. We cannot consciously expect them to just uproot and leave this country. And there are legislative plans, but again, I mentioned the failure within our congressional leadership to pass a permanent solution. So these are some of the bills that would offer our immigrant youth with, again, a permanent pathway to adjust status. Because we need to stop this Band-Aid, right? DACA is just a Band-Aid, it's not a permanent solution. So we, again, need to make sure that we do everything that we can to ensure that our legislators hear us, so that they take on and pass the DREAM Act, which we see as the only viable solution. But we know, again, that compromises have to be made, right? And so a bill that's not on here was a bill that was, again, being worked on and was voted on in the Senate that would, in addition to providing the Dreamers a pathway to adjust status for 12 years, right, when they would become citizens, it provided one of President Trump's wish lists, which was $25 billion to build the wall, right? And then it proposed to dismantle, to do away with the diversity visa. Even that compromise, again, failed in the Senate, right? It wasn't a bill that anybody was happy with because we wouldn't have written it, but again, we know that decisions have to be made. But in one, we have, and I shouldn't say it, but a president talks from two sides of his mouth. One way he says, I support Dreamers and I want, a pathway, I would treat them with heart. But on the other side, he's telling the delegations not to support any compromise bill. That's it. Yeah. On the same day, actually, after the meeting. But again, we have to put the pressure on our representatives so that they really take on these issues. Some things to know about, again, general rights of students when it comes to public education, right? All children in the K-12 system have a right to a public education. And again, this was something that was litigated and won and granted with Plyler v. Doe, which was a Supreme Court case. Again, that no child, regardless of their immigration status, can be turned away from a K-12 education. There are privacy protection laws that also apply not only for the K-12 but higher ed, right? FERPA, which is a Family Education and Privacy Act, means that it prohibits any school official administrator to provide or disclose information regarding a student's immigration status, right? So when it comes for higher ed, if a student discloses that information during the admissions process or for seeking financial aid, that information is also protected under FERPA. There is a memo, which is a policy procedural within DHS called the Sensitive Locations Memo, right? And again, it's policy. Again, because we've seen field ICE agents, violate this already, right? Which the Sensitive Locations Memo basically dictates that enforcement actions will not take place in schools, that include all K-12 and higher ed, post-secondary, or in hospitals or churches, demonstrations, imagine weddings or funerals, right? But it's a procedural memo. But why I remind people of this is that we then have the responsibility to ensure that our campuses, that our institutions are creating buffers of protection for our students and the families so that they have some reassurance that when they're going to school, that they don't run the threat of being detained by ICE, right? That if there's an altercation on campus and campus police, that they are not, working with ICE. Again, there's things that institutions can do, and I'm going to spell some of those things out. That the only way that ICE can be on campus is if there is an imminent threat to national security. They have to be able to present a judicial warrant, right, if they are going after somebody. So can ICE ever be on campus? It can be on campus if the school has M and F visa students, right? They have to do routine check-ins to make sure that the programs are running and functioning and the services of students are being met. But again, they cannot go on campus, or they should not. I should say they can't. They should not. If a school has a protocol in place that says that ICE will not go on campus unless a judicial warrant is presented. And that is what we talk about, again, ensuring that we review what the protocols and processes are at all levels of the educational system, right? Because school districts also have that responsibility, but colleges, universities have that as well. I talked a little bit about the emotional the impact that raids have on our students, right? The social and emotional impact it has. We know that students who have witnessed an ICE raid, experience this higher levels of chronic stress, behavior disorders, aggressive behavior, sleep and eating disorders. So that's why we need to be proactive and doing things to ensure that they feel safe. So how do we create safe and supported campus environments for those who study and work on campus? Right? We have to make sure that we are informing our students and their families of what rights they have, that we are educating our peers, our administrators, our faculty, and then the broader community about what those rights are, that we are doing what we're doing today, right? Having these conversations, and then taking the information and sharing it more broadly. That we are breaking down the educational barriers that our students are facing, and that we are at the heart of it all pushing for those legislative solutions. We have to make sure that our students understand that they are not alone, right? And that's why when we are really being disruptors in this work, we are informing them so that they know that we have their back when times get tough. That we are engaging in this process of self-reflection. Are we really valuing the diversity of our student body, of all of our student body? And how are we responding to the individual needs? Are we proactively addressing bullying? Are we conscious of the language that we use, right? People say, well, I'm using illegal alien because that's what Congress uses. Yeah, illegal alien is somebody that's impacted. It's a term filled with hate. You're dehumanizing somebody, you're tearing somebody down. So don't give me that pretext that you're building community if you start the conversation by using illegal alien. Have more respect for the students and families that we serve. That we learn about what are the state policies that govern that the state policies. In California, California passed a sanctuary state law, right? And I've been in trainings where I get people raise their hand, but so Cesar, we don't have to worry about that anymore. We're a sanctuary state. Oh, misinformation again. That does not protect families from encountering an ICE enforcement raid at home, at work, or in their communities, right? That's why it makes our work even harder to make sure people understand what those rights are and how they should engage in that conversation. The way that we're going to transform our campuses into places of learning free from hate, discrimination, and the threat of deportation is by making sure that we are reviewing our policies and practices regarding admissions, financial aid, student services, housing, health services, counseling and student engagement, again, our campus security and confidentiality practices. Pay close attention to those policies if they mention DACA, right? Because we know, again, that this current landscape, that needs to be changed. And how are we going to be responding to our students? That we operationalize it, right? We can't, again, like I keep saying, we can't be reckless because I've heard it one too many times. Oh, we already passed a statement. We have principles. And at the end of the day, it's like, well, what did you do with it? Oh, I don't know. Again, are we making sure that we proactively ensuring people know what those practices are? All right, I'm going to speed up here. I'm running out of time. But we make sure that we are lifting up the voices of our impacted community. Lift up the voices of the fellow Falcons at this campus, right? Because we know we have some that are impacted. And turn to resources. We have several organizations that are helping to lead some of this work. Again, you're not alone. If you want to do this conversation again or have trainings in depth about Know Your Rights, we have resources that we provide free to communities. This is one of the most widely used resources for educators that talks about, again, the rights families have. It has the Know Your Right tear cards in English and in Spanish, so at least they know what to do if they ever encounter ICE. And I am so fortunate to work with leaders on the ground, like my brother here, Jonathan Jones Green from Undocu Black, who has been helping to lead this movement as well, because we are in this body of work together. So thank you very much for the opportunity to join you. I look forward to the conversation. Turn it over now to Jonathan.
Gracias, Cesar. Gracias. And now my brother, Jonathan. And we have a group of distinguished folks over there who will chime in later. We'll have a conversation. What we're going to do is have students again write comments, cards, queries on their cards, and then there'll be two students reading the cards so that they can answer questions. Welcome, Jonathan.
Good morning, everyone. That was weak. Can we do that one more time? Good morning, everyone. So good to be here with you. I am actually a proud community college graduate, so it's always really happy to be at community colleges, because I actually believe that community colleges are one of the last institutions that actually extend opportunities for folks regardless of, class, regardless of status. And I still remember when I still am undocumented, but when I was graduating high school, that it was my community college, the only institution that actually saw my potential beyond my undocumented status. So I'm never going to be able to forget that. So thank you for the work that you're doing here. So I'm also the co-founder of the Undocu Black Network, and the Undocu Black Network is a multi-generational network of undocumented Black people organizing our own communities and building power. And the reason why we started Undocu Black and the reason why we do this work is because in our eyes, immigration is a Black issue. So I'm going to say that one more time, that immigration is a Black issue. What do I mean when I say that? Can you do the graph? It's mainly because there is people, right, that live at the intersection of both being Black and being undocumented. When we look at the national numbers, there's 4.2 million Black immigrants in the country. These are brand new numbers from the Pew Research Center. And you see that our community is growing rapidly. Right? If you look at the progression to 2016, we're growing really fast. Can you go to the next graph, please? Right, and if you're wondering where our folks are coming from, the top countries are Jamaica, Haiti, and Nigeria. Does that surprise anyone? No, right. And the reason why this is so important, right, is because there are people that experience this immigration system from a racialized perspective, right? We know that in this country that Blackness has been always viewed as criminal, right? So when you have people who are at that intersection, the way in which we experience the system reflects that. There was a study 2 years ago by the New York School of Law and the Black Alliance for Just Immigration that showed that Black immigrants are 3 times more likely to be detained and deported than any other immigrant group. Now, when you hear that, it might sound surprising, but if you understand how Blackness is criminalized and how we as Black immigrants are not exempted from that criminalization, it makes sense. If you go to the next graph, please. I'm going to make this really quick, but and also less than a month ago, a report came out showing that in the first year of the Trump administration, the actual deportation rates for most groups went down, except for that of African immigrants. The deportation of African immigrants rose exponentially. And here are the numbers. So if you look at the numbers from 2016 to 2017, look at Somalia. Can anyone guess why the deportation of Somali immigrants went up so high? Any guesses? Yeah? The Muslim ban, right? Somali immigrants are not just Black immigrants, but they're also Muslim. A lot of them are, right? And when you look at the Muslim ban, look at all the different attacks that are happening with our communities, it shows in our deportation rates, right? So this is why when we say immigration is a Black issue, this is what we mean, right? We're not just talking about wanting to say that there are Black immigrants. We're talking about Black experiences within the immigration system, and this is what it looks like. Nationally, right, we have this conversation around who is undocumented, and I think what also it often leads to is who is deserving of protection, right? I am a DACA recipient. My status expires in less than a year. And I know that our national dialogue has usually been about people who are young and undocumented like myself, right? And we're fighting for a DREAM Act because that's really important. And I really appreciate the beautiful job that Cesar did at explaining the urgency of what's going on, right? But I think we also need to understand that there is a broader community that is affected by this. Right? And even me identify as an Afro-Latino and also being queer, like all these different identities intersect in how we experience the system. And if we say that we support immigrant communities, we need to be asking what kind of immigrant communities are we supporting? When we do programs and workshops and opportunities, right, are we making it available for multiple languages that reflect the diaspora? Right? Like when we were talking about TPS, temporary protected status, right? We're talking about a group that hasn't been painted as the young, the hardworking, the ultra deserving young people, which is what I have, right? But TPS it's about really people who came here to work, right? TPS is a status that the U.S. government grants to nationals who come from countries that have gone through environmental or political turmoil. So these are people that have come here fleeing for their lives, right? And they deserve protections too. One number that we often don't talk about is that TPS communities are diverse, right? We've talked about that they are from Haiti, that they are from El Salvador. There was also TPS holders from West African countries. Did y'all know that? Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. Right, so whenever we're fighting for solutions for TPS, we need to make sure they are included too, right? And TPS holders, there are actually 91,000 TPS holders that are young people that would have qualified for the DREAM Act. And I think we usually see the TPS issue and DACA and the DREAM Act as separate, but this is a perfect example of how they intersect. At the end of the day, we could talk all day about tax, how much tax we contribute, all the things that we do for this community, but I never want us to forget that when we're talking about undocumented people, we're talking about people. We're talking about people who came to this country fleeing for their lives or really seeking opportunities, right? People who deserve protection regardless of their ability to contribute to our economy, right? And I think that a community college is the perfect space to be able to have that conversation, right? Because when we're fighting for protections for people, we're talking about students who are younger or older, right? We're talking about an institution that gives undocumented students and students in general a second shot, right? That's what a community college is to me, right? And something that we never want to be able to forget is that there is the importance of centering racial justice in this conversation, right? Like, we talked about the deportation rates, but I live in Baltimore, which is on the other side of the country, as y'all know. But when I walk down the street in Baltimore, and a lot of young people who are Black and undocumented feel this too, we're not just worried about being deported, right? We're really also talking about our Black lives, right? We're talking about how we're seen as a threat just because of who we are, right? And I think this really calls into question our understanding of the American dream. Now, as an immigrant, I came to this country and I was sold into this beautiful dream that if I just worked hard enough, that I would have access to all the opportunities and that things would be great, right? But as I got older and I realized what my undocumented status meant, I think I started to have questions. What does that dream mean for me when I work as hard as I'm told to do and that might not have access to the same things that I was told that I would, right? And I know it's a difficult conversation to have, but I believe that places like a community college have the opportunity to make that dream a reality for our students. I believe that it's up to us as the people to realize that dream, to protect one another, to love one another in a way that reflects our values, right? Right now, there is a young man named Sadat Ibrahim. He came to the US from Ghana 2 years ago. And he came because he's queer and he was fleeing persecution back in Ghana. And what do we say as a country? Give me your poor, you're free, huddle masses, right? So he comes to the US seeking protections, right? There's a gang back in Ghana called Safety Empire that was hunting him down. So he came to the US to live, right? It isn't just about working, it's about living for him. And in the process of seeking asylum, ICE somehow lost his paperwork, and they've been trying to deport him ever since. So he filed for an appeal, and he's been at a detention center for 2 years. And they refused, and even though he filed for an appeal and it's going through the process, they refused to let him out on bond. And I think these stories are what really breaks my heart, because as a country, we espouse that we believe in due process, right? Right? As a country, we espouse that people should have the opportunity to have a fair hearing. Now, Sadat was left to defend himself in that asylum process by himself, right? Because immigrants don't get court representation, right? So what does that mean about the due process that we espouse? And the fact that he's been there, it actually has gotten so bad that he started a hunger strike this week. So he's been on this hunger strike for 3 days already, because the guards were taunting him, calling him racially charged insults, right? And again, these are not the stories that we're hearing, but these are the stories that are happening right under our eyes. So I ask you, what kind of country do you want to live in? right? We've talked about what's going on in DC. We've talked about Congress and their inability to act, right? And there are bills that would fix different things in terms of TPS, the DREAM Act. But this goes so much more than that. This is about the heart and the moral compass of our country. That's what's at stake. And if we, each one of us, don't stand up and do our part to fight back, then we're complicit. We're complicit in the deportation of Sadat because the second he lands, he will be killed. We're complicit in the deportation of so many TPS holders and African immigrants, right, that are being sent back to no opportunities, right? We are complicit in the mass deportation and arrest that this administration is conducting. So who do we want to be as a country? Who do we want to be as people? I believe that because you are a part of this community college, the answer is very clear. So my ask to you is to examine each one of the opportunities that you create for immigrant students locally. How are you supporting African immigrants locally and Caribbean and Afro-Latinos like myself, right? Because we want to be inclusive. We want to be able to have a dialogue and solutions to reflect the people that are impacted. And I've shown you how Black immigrants are especially at risk. California is one of the top 5 states for Black immigrants. So what are we doing locally? What are we doing individually? And how do we stand back and say, these are the values that I stand for, and this is a country I want to be a part of? Thank you so much.
Okay. So these are for you, gentlemen, or for anyone on our panel. One of the questions is, if DACA goes to the Supreme Court, how will that decision impact other immigrant statuses?
So if the Supreme Court takes DACA, right, I think it's a very narrow framework right now in terms of what's being challenged, right, whether it was constitutional or not. So it will, to the extent that it's going to set a precedent for something else, I mean, that it depends on what the ruling actually is, right, and how it's actually worded. And what is at play is whether or not, if the Supreme Court takes it on, is whether it will dismantle the program, right? If we would agree with what this administration is saying and what DOJ is saying, or will it actually side with the Obama administration and their legislative work and their framing of it, that it was within their own right, right? So.
And if I may also add, I think it's also important to remember that we're talking about, so the larger picture is 11.2, 11.3 million undocumented people, right? So DACA covers 800,000 young people. We're talking TPS covers 300 to 400,000 people. So there's a whole lot of other folks that will not be affected by what happens with the Supreme Court and the DACA case, right? But they're also probably still your students, still your colleagues, right? So I would also push us to think about that as well.
While 800,000 have DACA, the universe of those that would be eligible, right, it's about 1.8 million of them. So again, if it's something that's ruled constitutional, then it opens the opportunity for this to apply. But I want us to focus more on the long term, right? Again, it's not patchwork. We got to make sure that we're pushing the administration and pushing Congress to just provide a solution, right? These band-aids do not move the country in the right direction.
So another question, why does it seem as if DACA is a Mexican issue? Can you address that?
The media plays a huge role in that, right? Immigration, undocumented immigrant, is always painted as a Latino issue. And it's clearly not a Latino issue only, right? That's why I thought it was hugely important to highlight the work that UndocuBlack is doing, because they're redefining the way people are viewing immigration in this country. The same goes with our partners in NACASEC and APALA and other organizations that are shifting the lens, because this is also impacting API immigrants in this country. But we hardly ever really have a substantive conversation, because those that watch Fox News always see who is shown in their coverage.
I mean, and I think that part of how we got here was definitely part of the media's role into really racializing Mexican immigrants in a particular way. And also, it's also true that the majority of DACA recipients are of Mexican origin, right? Like, that's not a lie. But what we're talking about is really the particular experiences of other groups, and particularly Black immigrants. Like, the fact that we're criminalized in the way that we're talking about these issues. There's at least 56,000 Black undocumented young people that were DACA eligible, that depending on which bill that we were talking about for the DREAM Act could qualify, right? And the fact that they are there, and the fact that we haven't talked about Black immigrants in general as a country, means that when it comes to resources, they're not accessing that. When it comes to opportunities and funding, right, like they might not see themselves represented, so they might not come to the table. Right? So I think that's why it's really important to be able to uplift the rest of the conversation and still center on the fact that these are people. Right, like these are really centering their humanity, and that's what we at Undocumented Black really believe in, right? Because for so long, like the impacts of these national conversations have a toll in our lives. Like, I can tell you, my mental health suffers every time we have one of those like DC rallies or bill debates that doesn't lead into a solution, because I know that my life is at stake, right? So how do we keep that in mind in terms of our work?
That goes with the next question, I think. It says, excuse me, how confidential is the information Dreamers submit with their applications, and can it be used against them?
So we are told that they're not sharing the information. That's what we were told. But again, we're also told that DACA recipients would be treated with heart, that they would be safe, and the lie detector found out that was a lie, right? I don't. In this moment that we are in, and again, this is just my personal opinion. I don't believe any of us undocumented people are truly safe. We've seen examples of ICE raids happen even in sanctuary cities, right? And as much as we try to protect folks, I think they always try to find a way. And I also believe that it's just a matter of time before they come out after people like me, right? There have been clear examples in the past 6 months of ICE actually going out and trying to deport activists. There was a case in Washington, there was a case in New York, there's a case in Florida, right? So we're living through some really difficult and uncertain times.
If you would ask Daniela Vargas, the first one here, documented individual who was detained after she spoke out about her father's deportation. And like her, Juan Manuel, Karimar Andujar, documented individuals who should not have been detained, because this administration made a promise that those that came forward, qualified, and met every single benchmark they set out, they were not going to be prosecuted, detained, and put at risk. Nobody reassured them that when they were in the detention. So we cannot 100% guarantee that the information will be kept or that they will be safe. But that's why it's our work. That's why we have to continue to fight and ensure that if they try to go after our students and our families, that we are going to stand up, that there will be an outcry, because we cannot continue to treat our immigrant brothers this way.
There are many questions, and because of the time, we will get to them. We just might not get to them in the morning session. But here is one, and understandably, a lot of them are fear-based, and I do understand that. I'm afraid, and I'm not DACA. The last question, what is expected to happen if DACA is officially terminated?
again, as I mentioned, the injunctions only bought people time, right? So the program is gonna, if the court rules that it was unconstitutional, the program phases out, right? So individuals will make that decision to survive another way, right? Let's not kid ourselves. Undocumented communities in this country are survivors. We knew that they were here before in June of 2012. Let's not kid ourselves. All of a sudden, we recognize that there were dreamers in our college campuses. So we had dreamers in schools. No, right? But they're survivors. They're gonna find a way to continue to contribute to their communities. You know, Ilvia mentioned that many of us who have been victims of racial profiling also feel fear, right? My mother, a legal permanent resident. I grew up not too far from here in Arvin, a small rural community outside of Bakersfield. She will call me crying when she said she saw that a border patrol was following her. Like, Mom, you have nothing to worry about. But because she doesn't speak too well of English, her English, she doesn't speak English too well, she gets scared. And she was detained, and she got questioned. She was crying. Again, it's just this unconscionable fear that paralyzes people, even if we're not directly impacted. But we need to, again, make sure people understand those basic rights and protections. And for her, she probably remembered what happened to my grandfather. How many of you remember Operation Wetback? He was a legal permanent resident, and he was just detained on the street, boarded into a truck, and thrown into Tijuana. Right? We were able to bring him back because he was clearly in this country with documentation. But is that where we're going with these kind of policies? Again, it's cracking the foundation of what this country was founded upon.
Thank you. Thank you, Cesar and Jonathan. And they're not going anywhere. We're going to keep them for the afternoon session. We're going to continue it with a wonderful set of a panel that's waiting to chime in as well. But first, we're going to take a little break. From 12 to 12:30, there are light refreshments in the Peregrine Room. Students are waiting to lead you there and lead you back. It's only half an hour, so it's kind of sort of lunch, but light and figure food. But we got food, so this is a good thing. So please come back when we continue a poignant conversation and perhaps supply more hope and answers. See you then. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a little time to just wander around, have a bite to eat, have something to drink. Now, welcome back to the afternoon session. It's my pleasure to continue this wonderful event. Cesar and Jonathan aren't leaving. They might chime in and join our panel, but I would like to introduce very special people. First, el señor Mario Galvan, who's part of the Zapatista Solidarity Coalition, which I am part of too. Woo, Mario, please come up. And also Rita Cepeda, my partner in, not crime, my partner in advocacy. Rita, she might have stepped out for a moment, but I'll reintroduce her. That's quite all right. And also Dr. Rhonda Rios Kravitz. I want to know what she drinks because she has more energy than I could ever muster. A wonderful advocate and part of Los Rios. Thank you, Rhonda. And last but, here comes Rita. No, I've got to do it again. One day, not today, because we might get in trouble. I'll tell you how we met. On the streets of Sacramento. Thank you, Rita, for being here. Thank you. If you look at their titles, I go, gosh, overachievers. Geez, makes me look, but okay, right, I have to be very real. All right. I love them. Last but not least is Mr. Jim Gonzalez. What can I say, Jim? I don't know how to introduce you. He's done it all. He was a San Francisco supervisor. He's a political strategist. I could go on and on. Governments have given him awards. I know he wants me to be quiet, but most importantly, he and my husband are bocce ball champs. Woo! So please, nuestra casa es su casa. thank you for coming. I'm delighted. You are my family. Thank you for being here for us, and take it away.
Thank you very much, Olivia. As she has already said, my name is Mario Galvan, and I'm here as a representative of the Zapatista Coalition of Sacramento. Real quickly, for those of you who don't know about the Zapatistas, they are indigenous people in the southern state of Mexico, in Chiapas, who rising up in rebellion against the Mexican government's corruption and lack of attention to their people. They, in January 1st, 1994, rose up in rebellion and have created a space in southern Mexico where they actually govern themselves, creating their own schools, medical clinics, and cooperative businesses. So it's an echo of President Kennedy's comment that those who make peaceful change impossible make revolutionary change inevitable. And I think that is an interesting way to enter this topic, because we're talking about a global situation here. And the point I would like to make by way of introduction is that DACA is one tiny slice of a worldwide problem of immigration that is not only affecting the Americas, but the entire world. Before I begin, I do want to let you all know that Drs. Cepeda and Rios Kravitz and I are the founders of a small organization called Step Up Sacramento, to encourage people to not just witness what's going on, but to step up and confront the harsh realities that are coming down from Washington, and of course these currents of racism that have been present throughout American history. We are also part of a greater organization in Sacramento called the Sacramento Immigration Coalition, which is made up of close to 40 different organizations, that including churches, National Lawyers Guild, various organizations doing this work to protect migrants and to combat the effects of ICE and these policies in our communities. Briefly, I would just let you know that my own family came from Mexico, which is why my main interest, although I have wide interests, is in Mexico and Latin America. So my comments will be directed more in that area. I want to say, though, that the being involved in the Zapatista movement for now more than 24 years, since 1994, it has opened my eyes. When our group started, we thought, this is happening in southern Mexico, and what can we do to help them? But when we got there and we learned more about them, we realized that they weren't just looking for a fix for themselves; they were looking for a fix for the entire country. And in the meetings that I've gone to in Chiapas with the Zapatistas, we find that people have come from all over the world, from Japan, Morocco, from Kurdistan, from South Africa. The message of the Zapatistas of human dignity and the rights of every individual just resonate throughout the world. And these are the rights that are being attacked by policies like ICE and DACA and everything that reduces some citizens to a second-class status or just kicks them out altogether through deportation. Why has immigration seemed to be such an insoluble problem? I would suggest that as a society, we have an unfortunate tendency to look only at the symptoms of a problem and not at the causes. For example, we condemn criminals without looking into the factors such as poverty or whatever that drive people to crime. Of course, I'm not talking here about those criminals from Wall Street who get rewarded for their crimes. we we criminalize homeless people without looking at an economic system we live in that gives incredible wealth to a few and forces, at the same time, forcing millions into poverty. How many of you heard about the hedge fund manager on Wall Street who earned, quote unquote, $7 billion in 1 year? How's that for a salary, right? I could, just work until the first coffee break and retire on that, geez. And coming to our topic today, we arrest, incarcerate, and deport poor people who are here looking for a better life without considering what made them desperate and what conditions and forces drove them to flee from their homes. And that's what I would like to address. It's unfortunate that what I have to say is that one of the great driving forces of immigration, especially in the Americas, but also around the world, is United States foreign policy. Even before I jump in, and as I do, I'm talking about a worldwide problem, but because of time, I'm going to limit myself to just talking about the Americas. But I would like to just say that we call ourselves a nation of immigrants, but the noted historian Samuel Eliot Morison wrote a very powerful book entitled "The European Invasion of America." So Europe came to a continent that was already inhabited, where there were different civilizations, etc., and brutally suppressed them and destroyed their culture and forced them to adopt other languages, other religions, etc. And then, of course, I also want to mention the African slaves brought here as unwilling immigrants that helped in the construction of America. So both our indigenous heritage, which I really appreciate, La Compañera Purépecha being here, and reminding us that we're in a sense occupied, conquered America. This land of immigrants that we call it. There's so much to talk about. Just as I tried to prepare for this talk, there was just such an overwhelming amount of information. But I just want to touch on a few things. Starting with the Monroe Doctrine. This is back in 1823. The U.S. was just barely born when it said, this is our territory. Nobody come in here. Speaking to Europe, but at the same time, claiming the beginning of a hegemony over all of the Americas. And later on, Theodore Roosevelt created what's called the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, in which the United States claimed the right to intervene in any Latin American country as an international policeman. So since then, the U.S. has been following this path of interfering in these other countries wherever it was to their benefit. And when I say their benefit, we always hear on the news about, we have to protect American interests. Those American interests are business, usually. The United Fruit Company, other companies investing, and it's still going on today. We can talk about this in the historical. We can go back, to the 1800s, the 1900s. The Panama Canal. I don't know how many of you know that Panama used to be part of Colombia, and that when Colombia wouldn't let the U.S. build a canal through their territory, they supported a rebel group that rebelled against Colombia, created a new country, and presto, they made a deal. The rebels got paid off $10 million to let the U.S. come in there. So way back, from the beginning of the 1900s, the U.S. has been overthrowing governments, sponsoring rebel groups to get their political ends. We can see that today in the Middle East and around the world. coming back to Mexico, in the history of Mexico, I think we all know about the Mexican War, where the United States actually took over half of the territory of Mexico in 1848, promising to respect the rights of the Mexican citizens who lived there, etc., which, of course, kind of like we were hearing about the promises to DACA students, were not honored, and lands were stolen away from people who had been living there for hundreds of years. In passing, I would again mention that almost every treaty the United States has made with indigenous peoples has been broken by successive governments. And in a sense, I have to think of Native Americans today as displaced people, herded onto reservations and again treated as second-class citizens. But again, just coming back to Mexico, I just want to point out that the United States sided with different factions in the Mexican Revolution, which lasted about 10 years. And we supported different sides and just angling to get the party into power that favored U.S. interests, which is why Emiliano Zapata, who gives his name to the Zapatista movement in Mexico, who was an indigenous person, ended up being killed while the large landowner, former governor of the state of Coahuila, Carranza, became president and instituted the corrupt PRI party, the party of the Institutional Revolution, which actually continues to hold the presidency of Mexico today. So real quickly, and someone timing me, I'm going to hit me with a cane here. The situation in Mexico today is tragic and frightening, and in a sense as horrific or more, depending on whether we're talking about Afghanistan or Iraq, the places in the Middle East, which you hear about in the news all the time, but interesting, we never hear about, almost never, about Latin America or what's going on in Mexico. But since we started off here talking about education and the role of teachers and students, I would just like to give a couple of examples of things that have happened in Mexico. The first one I want to talk about is the struggle of the Coordinadora Nacional de Trabajadores de Educación, an alternative teachers union in Mexico that is struggling to battle against educational reforms the government is putting in. If you can believe it, this educational reform was written into NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. So this trade agreement actually has implications for teachers and for education. So there have been strikes about this throughout Mexico, and police arriving, in Mexico and throughout Latin America. One of the ways people protest is they don't just go down to City Hall; they block the highways, and just do this. But in Mexico, both teachers and farmers who have been impacted by NAFTA have been fired on by police. You can get off the road. It's not just mind your own business. So there's a brutal repression. I also want to mention the case of Ayotzinapa. How many of you guys heard of Ayotzinapa? Does anyone know that? A couple of people. Ayotzinapa is a case that happened a couple of years ago where students who had commandeered a bus, and again, this is something that's common in Mexico and Latin America, where poor people, they wanted to go to a protest in Mexico City, so they were raising money. And what they do is they, like a bunch of students get on the bus and they say, "We're taking the bus over," and of course they give it back later, so they can all go where they want to go. But it turned out that bus had a secret stash of cocaine that was being smuggled through Mexico, and so the police came after them. And they actually just opened fire on the bus. They didn't just stop it and say, "Okay, you guys get off, we're taking your bus." They actually started shooting, killed a number of students, and arrested maybe 40 students. And the most incredible part of all, the police turned the students over to a drug gang to be killed, underlining the claim by many people that the drug cartels in Mexico have infiltrated the police, army, and the government. in the last 10 years in Mexico, and I'm sharing examples that people who've come to Sacramento here. A couple of years ago, we had a group of women came called the Caravan Against Repression in Mexico, talking about this, talking about the teacher strike, talking about the students, talking about women being murdered, femicides, hundreds of women in Juarez and in other places in Mexico. But with impunity, in Mexico in the last 10 years, one of these women said 150,000 people have been murdered. You think of that's like a war going on. And in addition to the people murdered whose bodies are found, there's tens of thousands of people who are just disappeared. So, I mean, this is just brutal repression, but there's also the economic battle. And again, this comes down to, and I'll try and wrap up here because I don't want to take too much time. But this it's part of the war on drugs. But under NAFTA and some of the other reforms that are going on, if you can believe it, the Mexican government has tried to pass a law where the corporations could buy rivers. You can actually buy the river, and or you could buy a lake. And in Mexico, if a company comes to where you live and they say, "Oh, well, we want to make a mine here or an oil field or something," you can't tell them no. They'll use something like eminent domain to just push you off your land. I read a case in Mexico where a gold mine, one of the richest gold mines in Mexico, took over I don't know how many 100,000 acres and didn't pay the owner of the land anything at all. And of course, the connection there is, well, why would people want to leave such a happy-sounding place? Huh? Why do people flee for their lives and risk their lives in the desert? 10,000 people having died in the desert trying to cross into the United States. Again, it comes back to the fact that this criminality and corruption I'm talking about is supported by the United States government. So coming back to DACA, where we're starting here, and the question of how we can resolve it, I believe that all of the DACA students who were raised here in the United States should be granted citizenship outright with no more hoops to jump through. But again, that's just one step in solving the overall problem of immigration. If we just take care of DACA and don't do anything about the big picture, we'll be back here again in another couple of years, and there'll be another group of people who have moved in here and so on. So we really have to, and I urge you all to think beyond just what you hear in the media about the problem of immigration, and try to open the conversation about what are the causes of this. I do believe, as Jonathan was saying in his presentation, that we're in a unique place here. We're in a country where there is still some semblance of democracy. And as a Zapatista, I would say that the problem is in our political parties. I never tire of pointing out that if you read the Constitution, there isn't a single word about political parties in the Constitution. But somehow, political parties have taken over the United States government, and they serve in Congress at the behest of the corporations. So this government runs on money. And that's why we have a society today, unfortunately, that values profit and money more than human life. That's the challenge for us, and as Martin Luther King told us, what this country needs is a revolution of values, like the Zapatistas, who had to use guns to do it, but we can do it with votes because we are the majority, and we're allowing ourselves to be controlled by a minority who are running us down. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mario. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Yeah. I invited Mario here for many, many reasons. Most importantly, because, just to wrap it up, and not to wrap it up, you can continue chiming in, but something came to my mind. If I go to Mexico, I never see atrocities. I just see very peaceful situations. Yet what Mario's talking about is absolutely true. So why is it that my reality is so different than the one that Mario's talking about, which is true? And that is because Mario represents the indigenous voice. We don't know, my students don't know, our university, our colleges don't know, that the people coming across are Native American peoples. They're Native American peoples. They shouldn't need a green card or pass. I mean, they are the peoples of this land. And so we need to look at that double reality. Why is their reality different than the one I or you might experience? The other thing is that, yes, they are warriors. But roll forward the story, and the Zapatistas won the International Nobel Peace Prize. Who gets that? Einstein, Jimmy Carter. Okay, I'm not a history person, but they are holders, keepers of the Nobel Peace Prize. So when they speak, I listen. And they live, they're still warriors, but more of the word and movement. And they live quite well compared to how they did when the revolution first started. But the cause goes on, the struggle goes on. So thank you, Mario, for representing the most important voice, the Native Americans. And now, Dr. Rita Cepeda, she was a chancellor. Well, it's emeritus, so it's like, I'm in awe of my friend Rita, and I'm so happy that you're here, and we're here to listen to you. The first time I met her, she said, I just retired. I said, oh, no, you can't. Oh, no, you can't. We need you. We need you. We need your wisdom, and here we are, Rita. Thank you so much.
So much. Well, thank you for having me. My greatest joy in the entire world is being on a community college campus with community college students. So thank you for that. We are a threesome, Mario, Rhonda, and Rita. So Mario talked about the history behind immigration. I think our colleagues Cesar and Jay spoke about the horrific current situation which we're living through. But we are not to forget that this has deep roots. Lots of folks say, well, why do they want to come to the United States? I commend you to an article, actually a piece called Harvest of Empire, that talks about the role of the United States in Latin America. My role is to sort of talk about the personal impact, because I'm obviously an immigrant. I was born in Nicaragua and came to the US when I was 11 in 1963. Do not do the math. But we'll talk about, this is the worldview, what's happening in Latin America. There's an article called 19 Reasons Besides the American Dream of Why Latin Americans, why Latino Americanos come to the United States. Each one of them have to do with invasion, with intervention, and with the kinds of things that the United States has done for X, Y, or Z reason since the 1700s, quite frankly. So let's go quickly. This is a lot of stuff, and I'm going to go quickly through it, so if you would go to the next one. We just, the threesome here again, did a presentation a while back to Jesuit High School under Social Imperative Week, I believe it was called. Great audience, nice young man, very polite, very homogenous, and immigration and immigration issues were something that was happening to somebody else. They were looking at it as, and I mean this with all due respect, because they were a very wonderful young man, but they were looking as though they were looking in a zoo, outside looking in at this immigrant issue. And that sort of prompted me to change my presentation, although I see, as I always see in community colleges, a very diverse community sitting out there. So you will wonder, why is it that I'm going through this when you already know that? But let me go through very quickly. Let's go through the next one. So in America, as was said by all my colleagues, Cesar, Jay, everyone that's been out there, we're all immigrants. We come from somewhere else. Unless you were a native person, unless you were someone who inhabited this country, this continent, quite frankly, before everybody else got here. Let's go on to the next one. We talked about the history of African Americans, or people of African descent, and the unwilling immigration. But here's our sad story, folks. 1609, this goes to 1620, but this is when people came to the United States in ships against their will, as slaves to this country. By the year of 1866, 476, you see the arrivals in ships, and this is well documented. Total of 326 individuals that were taken from Africa to the United States. The United States was not the only place, by the way. It also happened throughout the Americas. But I'm just talking about who we are as a people and that part of the unwilling immigration of Africans, people of African descent to the United States. Please. So here's where they came. And as you can see, the slave trade all over. South America, like Senegal, Sierra Leone, West Africa, Congo, Angola, and where they came, the West Indies. And by the way, the #1 place in the United States that had the greatest input in the slave market was Nueva Orleans. So, by the way, I have about 5 relatives from Nicaragua and Nueva Orleans, so that's why we say Nueva Orleans. I think you say New Orleans, or something like that. So next one, please. So here is, again, the role that New Orleans, which was the largest slave state market, and a bill of sale. Human beings for sale, family, children. Go ahead. There's also this thing about we're either people of color, or we're Latinos, or we're Asians. But the greatest immigrants to this country were Germans, right up here. Then came Italians, then British, then Irelands, then Canadians, then Soviet Unions, and here's Mexico. So here's the perspective. So the browning of America, yes, it's happening after a fact, but the issue is that this notion that all these people of color, non-Europeans, are a threat to America has wrong foundations. Let's go on. Next one, please. So here's another example. What happened? You begin with the 1820s, the greatest group of immigrants, Irish, Germans, United Kingdom. You see Canada. By the way, I think the first undocumented person I ever met when I was 11 years old was a Canadian immigrant. But anyway, she took care of us. We were, childcare. So here is the sort of profile that happens there. Let's go to the next one, please. So subsequently, as my colleagues said, there were and continues to be, to the present, now immigrants from various countries or various sections of Africa. Go on. Now, this is a 1917 picture from Ellis Island. Do you find yourself there? This is what they looked like. And here's how we look like now. So let's go on. I hope you find yourself here somewhere. Here's folks from the Balkan states. Let's go quickly to this. Immigrants from Finland. Here's a Dutch family with 11 children. 11. I thought most folks think only Latinos do that, or Italianos, right? Here is Serbia. Go on. Austrian girls, Russian immigrants, please. Greeks, Romanians. A German family with 7 sons and 1 daughter. Italian immigrants. A Manchu family, Chinese Manchu family in Oregon. Jewish immigrants. Polish immigrants. And here's a Mexican immigrant family, a mother with 3 sons and 1 daughter. Did you find your family there? I'm sure you did. And I'm sure you didn't think you were an immigrant or a descendant of an immigrant, or that this is your issue, or that at some point the kinds of things that are happening to immigrants in this country happen to all of us. If you were a person of color, probably there's a little more immediate recognition of being the other than if you happen to blend in because of your skin tone. So let's go on to the next. So there's Rita Cepeda, the immigrant. That's my passport photo when I was in 1963. I arrived at LAX, which is the Ellis Island, I think, of California. And here I happened to be in 2007 with President Obama, as I was invited to the White House with my hubby. They're very tall, wonderful people, by the way. So I want you to own this. This happens to be a piece from, you probably recognize it, you've seen it very most often, Martin Niemöller, Lutheran pastor, by the way, who at the beginning sided with the Nazis in Germany. When Hitler first began his propaganda in Germany, he thought might not be a bad idea. Does that remind you of something going on in this country right now? Might not be a bad idea. So he wrote this piece. By the way, eventually he did recognize his responsibility. He ended up in a concentration camp and came and wrote these pieces. But it's all about persecution, guilt, and responsibility. It doesn't matter how this touches you. If you want to feel guilty about it, fine. If you want to talk, if you're being persecuted, fine in terms of what prompts you to move and to act. But it's great to read because he says first they came for the socialist and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me. And there was no one to speak for me. He, by the way, wrote this poem with the idea that you could replace those individuals, those persecuted groups, with what's happening in any country at any given time. Let's go on, please, very quickly. So my friend Mario spoke about the role of the United States. Why do people come here? Well, the American dream is a big deal, and I have to tell you, when my father decided to come to the United States in '61, the American dream was a big deal, but there were a whole host of reasons behind that that had to do with the US intervention in Nicaragua. So how do you like to be a country in 1855? So this guy shows up, William Walker. He decides he's going to be president of Nicaragua. He just shows up, he's in his mid-30s. By the way, recognized then by the President of the United States, and says, I'm coming to this country because of American expansionism. I'm here to save you. I'm going to become president. And he takes over Nicaragua in 1855. It didn't last but a year, but nevertheless. He actually was executed in Nicaragua, not any other country, in 1860, but he declared himself president. What a nice idea, according to him. So, of course, there's been other issues where in the early 1900s, the U.S. broke relationships with Nicaragua, by the way, or the Panama Canal issue, because we're talking to Germany and Japan about the waterway, so U.S. didn't like it, so no relations with Nicaragua. Let's go very quickly. I'm not going to read through all of this, you can, but you can see occupation, occupation, reoccupy, occupation. So my grandparents lived through some of these things, and I heard about it, by the way, until 1937, when for 43 years we had, quote, stability with the dictator, Anastasio Somoza, US-backed, by the way. And so in that period of time, between 1937, 1936, and 78, my family made it out of Nicaragua. So let's go on. So here's where my dad got the bright idea, 1962. At that time, it just so happened that Nicaragua had what was called favored nation status. So it was possible for my father to come in 1961, and just 1 year later to bring my mother and 5 children legally to the United States. What would have happened? So I'm an accident of history. What would have happened just a few years later? Where would I be? What would have been my future as an immigrant in the United States? So let's go through. So again, we have now the earthquake in Nicaragua in '72, then we have the Sandinista uprising, which you all, I'm sure, are old enough, maybe, looking at the audience to know about. But what would have happened if my dad had just waited a few more years? The whole world, my whole future, my grandchild's future would be different. So remember the accidents of history. And you are here, and you are not in the shoes of someone who is being persecuted, but by the grace of God in some instances. Let's go on. You all remember the Iran-Contra scandal? So again, bad news at that time, absolutely bad relations with Nicaragua. Things have changed. Somebody else took over, Violeta Chamorro, and so on and so on. So it's so ups and downs. But has always been and will continue to be this intervention in Nicaragua. This is true of Haiti, Haiti, Jamaica, Brazil, Panama, Cuba, Mexico, you name it, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala. So it's a reason why there's instability or destabilization in some of the countries, immigration, upheaval that leads individuals to come to the United States. Many reasons. Some are natural causes, but many are man-made. And that is important to remember. Let's go on very quickly. So here then I land as an educator. I decided as I came in 1963, it was a wonderful period to come to the US because it was right before the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So the nation became my textbook in terms of what I wanted to do with my life. I decided it was education because it is ignorance then that causes us to relive certain things or to treat people differently when you don't know what your role has been or that of your ancestors. Let's go on. I chose community colleges, by the way, because I don't know how many of you know this, but community colleges is a movement. And it is a unique American invention. It's open admission processes where we take you wherever you are, we assess you, and we place you. That doesn't happen anywhere else. There are countries from all over the world, China, I met with many of them, Australia, South Africa, I remember some of the folks I met with, Germany, who wanted to know, how do you do it? How do you take people with various backgrounds, various levels of education, sometimes various languages, and create a student body, take them from where they are to where they're going to be? I'm evangelical about community college, so I better stop because I'm going to go on and on about this. But anyway, this is why we're so critical, and I'm glad that Jay recognized, he's one of our proud alum. So here we are. Here's California Community Colleges, who, by the way, you have to know, is the largest segment of public post-secondary education in the world. In the world, not just California, not just the United States, the largest segment of public post-secondary education. It's a proud and a good place to be. Therefore, you have extraordinary responsibility to do right by people. Let's go on, please. This is 2016 data, so it's a little dated, but you see where UC is, you see where CSU is. Look at community colleges. We more than double what the other entities do in terms of education for California. So the significance is enormous, and so is the responsibility to do well. This is 2017 data. At that time, the issue was if we used AB 540 students as proxy, there were about 61,000 undocumented students in California community colleges. That's just a proxy because there's no accurate data to measure them. Now, we're going to talk about what to do next, and here's your role again. If you own this now, whether you feel responsible, guilty, or persecuted, if you own this now to do something, here's key. Lots of folks look at the academic side of community colleges. I did as well as a president or chancellor. But the key, the place where we make or break students many times is student services. Because that's the first place where they meet someone and the first place where they can be derailed or placed on the right track. So this is very important. Let's go on. So this is another important thing. You want to know what to do as a community college student, faculty, or staff? Remember that your board of trustees, they pass policies, not practices. The board adopts policies and practices. The board makes clear what needs to be done, but they don't tell you how. That rests with your president or superintendent. You have a great president today in this college. But he, like all other presidents, as I was or as a chancellor, need to be held accountable by you. Because his role is to talk about how the policies in this college are going to be implemented. How? It's up to him or her in some situations. Let's go on. So the next step then in talking about your role and responsibility is the issue of informing. Thank you. The issue of training, the issues of implementation, monitoring. Because sometimes we breathe a sigh of relief. A policy passes. Oh, they signed policy X, Y, or Z. We're fine. And then it sits and collects dust somewhere, and nobody knows anything about it. But you feel relieved. Not good enough. Establishing accountability measures is very important. The question about how DACA students, how undocumented students are faring on this campus, Los Rios Community College District, should be a matter for the Board of Trustees to look at every month. There should be a report. How are they doing? Not just how are our buildings doing, how's our budget doing, what about participatory governance? All those things are great. There should be at every meeting a look at the prospect of how our students are doing in general, students under the Student Success umbrella. So again, if we want to change what Nia Muller said to today, we can say, first they came for the Muslims, and I did not speak out because I was not a Muslim. Then they came for DACA youth, and I did not speak out because I was not a DACA person. Then they came for the immigrants, and I did not speak out because I was not an immigrant. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Thank you.
Gracias. Thank you very much. That's some empowering information to take to the Board of Trustees and the admin. But we're also responsible, every employee, every student. I just want to remind you to please write down your questions, comments, because it's the way that we can have a meaningful interaction given this large group of people. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Rhonda Rios-Kravitz. What can I say? You know, it's too sappy, Rhonda. And I remain in awe. Thank you for your inspiration.
I have to tell you one thing about how Elvia met Rita. So Rita and I have been colleagues now for a while, even though we're both community college administrators, retired. We would meet in Sacramento, not in the community college environment. It was kind of interesting. But Rita says to me, oh, I met this most incredible woman at the Women's March. I went to D.C. to march. She marched in Sacramento. And she said her name is Elvia. And, you know, Elvia is not an uncommon name. I'm thinking, oh. And then we all three of us come together. She said, this is the Elvia I met. I go, Elvia, this Elvia. So it's so powerful to be among these women. They are my role models forever.
But I leave it up to Elvia to talk about the sign she was carrying. That's all. Which drew me immediately. But anyway.
I went to the Women's March and I didn't write on both sides, just on one side. So I had to write something on the other side, and it was in Spanish, and a popular word came out describing the current state of things, and that drew us.
I also,
it starts with a P.
Yes.
Ho.
It could have started with a C too, but what can we say? I also want to say I'm the author of a publication on undocumented institutions. I was asked to write that by Sacramento City College. I have never, ever been asked to talk about that document. It has been shelved, and so I speak about that now to say it is out there. It is a document that you can read. The college might have tried to hide it as whatever reason. Carlos told me he actually saw it. I'm shocked he saw it because it has been totally silenced. But if you know me, I refuse to be silenced. So I want to begin my presentation with a poem, and it is a poem by a woman by the name of Praise Odiji. You probably know her, Jonathan, I think. She's a Nigerian-born writer and filmmaker based in Brooklyn, New York, and her poem is entitled How an Undocumented Immigrant Looks at America. You ever ran for miles and miles to reach your destination and realized that you didn't have the key? You refused to give up. You knocked until your knuckles bled, and you kept knocking and knocking and knocking, hoping someone was listening, hoping someone was there, hoping you'd knock so hard you'd eventually break down the wall of indifference that lay ice cold over their conscience. There is something life-changing about that moment when you realize there are no other options. There are no spare keys for the undocumented immigrant, and so you raise your tired knuckles and you knock, and you knock, hoping that someday someone will be kind enough to open the door. Today, our DACA and TPS recipients and their families and other undocumented communities, the 11.2 million plus, are struggling against remarkable odds to claim their basic rights, their fundamental rights. They know what it means to continuously face a wall of indifference, a wall where you knock and no one answers. Living undocumented means you regularly experience discrimination, exclusion, and fear. Being undocumented means you can ask a person, how can they be illegal when no human being is illegal? Being undocumented, you know what it means to be abused by unethical employers. You know what it means to be given the wrong information at our colleges and universities about financial aid and other policies, and not to be provided a space for an undocu-center. You know what it means to be told by others that you have no right to fight back. But the dreamers I work with on a daily basis refuse to live in a state of invisibility. The dreamers I work with on a daily basis challenge the racist and nationalist views of what immigrants are. They fight against the malignant demonization of undocumented scholars and their families. They have gone beyond gaining access to their own citizenship and have profoundly expressed the anti-immigrant culture that has existed for decades in the US. They fight for comprehensive immigration reform for all 11.2 million. Their campaign, as you've heard from Cesar, is to drop the I word and the A word. And I ask each and every one of you in this audience never to use those words. But now I add the C word. What is the C word? Does anyone know what the C word is? Because I say there's I, A, and C. What's the C? Chain. Chain migration rather than family reunification. I refuse to use C, but it also stands for criminalization because that's what we have done to our TPS and our migrant communities. And I go on to let you know that we want to frame the issue of immigration as an issue of rights, civil rights, and human rights. My dreamers that I work with on a daily basis are disciplined messengers on our campuses and in our communities, in our public meetings, and their protests and letters to Congress have been meaningful and heartfelt. They have transmitted their messages to the media through their personal stories, and many of you have heard them. They are an important force in the national immigration debate. They are undocumented, unafraid, unapologetic, and the ones in my community have said we are unwavering. We will not stay hidden. Their fight today is a fight for equality, and as I said again, never ever utter the I, the A, and the C words. However, as we are acutely aware, Congress is unable to act, and deportation is now an ever-present danger. The deputy of ICE, Thomas Homan, who actually made a visit here to Sacramento, and some of you may have seen him here in Sacramento, in June 2017 stated, "No immigrant population is off the table. When it comes to deportations, ICE will be going from," and I quote, "0 to 100, but it isn't 100. 200 people were arrested in Southern California just last week. When it comes to detaining immigrants who haven't committed any crimes, he has stated all immigrants should be uncomfortable. You should look over your shoulder. You need to be worried." And that's why we stand, and that is why we fight. As I told someone in the audience the other day, when I say stand up, you say fight back. Stand up, fight back. So we need to worry that the Trump administration has really dramatically changed the conversation around immigration. It's no longer about viewing immigrants as a net positive for the society or the economy. It's about framing immigrants as a threat to America's economic and national security. They are, as Trump referred to Mexicans, immigrants, rapists, and criminals. Now more than ever, it's important that policies and power structures on the local, state, and national levels, including our colleges and universities, reflect the important and critical values of inclusion, respect, and dignity, and that they also reflect the fundamental observance of civil liberties, human rights, and freedoms. When the government uses its powers to deny legal rights and due process to all vulnerable groups, such as the undocumented, Muslims, LGBTQ, and communities of color, then everyone's rights are at risk, as Rita so articulately pointed out. For example, federal immigration enforcement policies, including border enforcement measures by Customs and Border Protection have led to an increase in racial profiling, border killings, and denial of due process rights. Immigrant workers are often abused, exploited, and they have become scapegoats and victims of racism and stereotyping. And it's really important that all of us as educators, as students, know about and provide the tools and resources needed to help guide undocumented scholars and employees. On a policy level, that means taking concrete steps to decouple our college police law enforcement from immigration authorities and passing sanctuary safe haven, if you can't use the word sanctuary, use the word safe haven resolutions with strong accompanying sanctuary policies. We cannot sit back and not act and not stand. One way colleges and universities need to act is through that enactment of strong sanctuary policies. Students must feel safe. So what is a good policy? What does a good policy say? And Cesar talked about it. We need to have safe zones that really adopt and implement written policies that prohibit any communications with federal agencies or officials and refuse all voluntary information sharing with federal or immigration agents. We need to adopt and implement written policies that safeguard the privacy of all our student records and allow district staff to share student information with federal law enforcement. We need to adopt and implement policies that prohibit staff, campus security, or campus police from collecting or divulging any information regarding information status. As with any law enforcement agency, we need to require federal or immigration agents seeking information at a school site to have a warrant. And that warrant cannot be an ICE warrant. So when you see an ICE warrant, you do not have to follow that, but it needs to be a warrant that is signed by a federal or state judge. We need to send a strong message to our staff and students and families, telling them that we proudly affirm the values of diversity and inclusion. We need to take measures to ensure that staff, students, and families understand that all students are guaranteed equal access to school. And we need to establish safe spaces. There are many things that make for an incredible sanctuary policy. But now I'm going to show you your Los Rios policy. And this is the policy that I will fight, and I'm going to ask each and every one of you to fight.
You know she's from Los Rios, right? Okay.
She is a Los Rios, and that's why I fight. Because Los Rios can be great. Los Rios should be great, but Los Rios needs to be responsible to its undocumented populations. If you know me too, you'll know that I arrived at Los Rios in 2007. I was a faculty member. I came to be a dean. I was also a union member, a strong union member. I think Los Rios hired me because they never read my resume. They didn't know that I was a union activist. They didn't know that I was a fighter. But the day that I walked on campus, undocumented scholars said, "Will you be our advisor?" And I was proud and honored. So for 7 years, I was the advisor for our undocumented students. So look at this policy. This is what you got. 5 items. I told you what a policy should say. Number 1, call the Los Rios Police Department. You start with the police. Do undocumented scholars want to start with the police? Tell me why you don't want to start with the police. Why? It's a criminalization and for fear. Politely ask the officer to show you their identification and refer them to the president's office. Is ICE polite? Does ICE lie? Does ICE sometimes not wear its uniform? Is ICE going to say, "Oh," Elvia says to me as my ICE, "Oh, Rhonda, would you please just let me know that I like you?" I mean, ask the officer for a copy of the warrant or signed consent. ICE may give you a warrant that is their warrant. You don't even have to pay attention to that. ICE says, I can give you many incidences where ICE has given you tremendously false information. Scan and email warrants to sherry@losrios.edu. If they have a signed consent, send them to admissions and records. And so what do my students say about that? So are you going to give them all my name and my information and my address and call me at such and such and remind them that I've also got 6 siblings and parents that are also undocumented, and you can pick them all up in one fell swoop. This is your policy. This is a policy that was created with faculty and staff and administrators, but not one student. Is that acceptable? No. That is not acceptable. So I come here as a Los Rios person, as a former administrator, but as an undocu scholar advocate to say, don't allow this policy to be in place. But my advocacy doesn't stop there. I'm going to go through one quick thing. Because, yes, uno más, what can I say? There is another way that I want you to think about advocacy. So what happens? You were asked the question, what happens when Congress doesn't act? What happens if the Supreme Court, which we think will be a 5-4, not in our favor with Gorsuch, that I deeply fear? What happens when all of our documented individuals lose their status, lose their EADs, and can't work? How many are working on your campus as faculty, as staff, as students? Do you say, Rita, today's your last day. Mario, today's your last day. Cesar, goodbye. Jonathan, goodbye. Your last day was when that EAD. Or do you fight back? And so a USF immigration lawyer and professor has said, we need to do more. We need to do civil disobedience. We need to say, I'm keeping each and every one of you. Your jobs are safe and will stay. You will not lose your jobs. But we're not going to do it under the table. We're going to be bold, and we're going to say, we're keeping you on. And he asked all corporations to do the same. And you know what he talks about? There have been many an instance where we have seen corporations do civil disobedience, right? What's the one that you think about? What did Apple do when they were asked to turn over the Apple security to a phone that were used by the shooters in San Bernardino? Did they turn it over? No. So Apple employs a lot of people. Apple has documented individuals. We want Apple to say, you did that act of civil disobedience. Now stand for your employers. Now stand for those that have given so much back. There's only one corporation that has said that they will keep their employees. It's Airbnb. So now you can go use Airbnb because they have said they will keep their employees. So what we say is, business people do not abandon their conscience simply because they are in a business setting. If the choice to intentionally violate a business regulation is truly a matter of moral principle rather than convenience, then like all forms of civil disobedience, it is to be applauded, not condemned. So I ask you as students, as staff, as faculty, as administrators, to stand and ask Los Rios to be upfront about its willingness to keep on its employees and to do it with the moral conscience that is so key and critical at this time. Alianza, Step Up, all of the organizations that we represent will stand firm with people of color across the country whose voting rights are threatened. We will stand firm with those whose TPS status has been ended. We will stand firm with LGBT communities under siege. We will stand firm with all the brave women across the country fighting discrimination and harassment. We go to campuses all the time fighting for strong sanctuary policies. By the way, how many of you have seen this policy that are from Los Rios? 1. What makes a policy good? 3. You need to know it exists. So if you were a student and ICE came to campus, should you know about this policy? Is there something even to protect me? Are you trained? It requires training. It requires knowledge. So when you have policies that are only rhetoric and not implemented, then that is sad. And we want you to look at your policies in many ways. We have FERPA. As you said, there is FERPA. But we want every student to know what FERPA means. We want them to be trained in it. We want every employee to be trained in FERPA, not only when you arrive as a new employee, but regularly to be updated. We want you as students to know what is in your campus directory. Is that information that I should say, I only want my name and major, because if I'm an undocumented scholar, then I may not want that information. I want to know what my rights are as a student. Protect me. We have a right as colleges, and we have a moral responsibility as colleges to protect our students, to protect our staff and faculty who are undocumented. So please, as we say, stand up, stand up, actively engage, be disruptors, be unapologetic, and ensure a bright future for all. We are indeed educators.
Did I tell you this was going to be, it's a great group, a lot of power up here, but they share it, they empower us. Before I present Mr. Jim Gonzalez, I'd be remiss because, you know, the saying, and it's true, that behind a great man is a great woman. And I would be remiss if I didn't do that. Please, Mrs. Maria Morales de Gonzalez, please stand up. She's been there the whole time. And incredibly, we know each other since we were 14, about what, 15 years ago or something? Okay, with that, Mr. Jim Gonzalez, thank you, and the floor is yours. Please write your questions, comments.
It's on? Well, thank you so much. Very hard act to follow from the presenters here, and I think they deserve an applause. Really amazing. Just to do the, I'm a recovering politician, so I'm going to do what politicians do and open up with a bunch of thank yous. And obviously, when Professor Elvia Perez invited me to this, I said, my God, how did you accomplish, you know, in the barrio of Folsom Lake to get everybody to have this type of a forum? And it shows really the progressive nature of the administration here. So I don't know if Mr. Whitney Yamamura, the president, is here, but I want to compliment the president and also Dean B.J. Snowden for making this forum possible. Because, you know, if any heat comes, they're going to have to, you know, deal with it. But again, this is not a time to be mild-mannered. It's time to be a superhero, and I applaud that, and I admire Professor Elvia Perez as really a superhero. I've been dealing with these emails back and forth, and know how many nights you know, I've gotten this email at 1 o'clock in the morning about, did you see the program? So the dedication is unbelievable and wonderful. But, you know, I don't expect you to like politicians. We really don't have a good name right now. Because what has really happened to our society, to America, is we are living through an era of fear. And it's fear even in daycare centers, childcare centers, where teachers have toddlers come up to them and ask, is it true that I'm going to be sent to, my parents are going to be sent away? And teachers have to deal with that. And I think teachers have to deal with that in elementary school, in high school, in community college, at the universities. You know, there's 222,000 Dreamers in California. We have the largest group. And there is this fear of deportation that they have been living with for the last few months with this rescission by Donald Trump of DACA. And that fear has permeated throughout all our communities in California and in, of course, other states that have DACA students. And I think it's really important that this forum take place in a place like Folsom Lake, because this dialogue has to happen in places where it's not expected at all. And so the next applause that I want is for you, the attendees. You made the time to come here. You care. You are unafraid, and I applaud you for that. I go back to fearing INS raids from the time that I was a child in San Francisco. My parents came to the United States and met in San Francisco in 1948. My father came from Guatemala, and he had seen the United States government overthrow a progressive government, the Ottomans government, on behalf of the CIA, because the CIA director was a guy called Allen Dulles, and his brother was Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, and Arbenz wanted to do agrarian reform and give the peasants of Guatemala, the indigenous people of Guatemala, their land, and suddenly he was branded a communist, and Guatemala was invaded by a puppet government. My Castillo Armas, right. ¿Es usted guatemalteco? Mexicano, pero sabe la historia. And on my mother's side, Nicaragüense, you know. But, you know, she was of the part of the family that really wasn't particularly proud of, she was from the Castrillo family, which, if you know of the Castrillo-Knox agreement, was one of these agreements which said that the United States could intervene in Nicaragua anytime they wanted to. So we weren't that particularly proud of my grandfather. But you had this nice young couple in San Francisco who really tasted the progressiveness of the labor movement in San Francisco at that time. My parents worked in the factories of San Francisco and also had to hold down 2 jobs to raise us, you know, work in the factories during the day and then go do janitorial work at night. And but, you know, every now and then we would, in the neighborhood, hear of a family that had been deported, and would see that there is nothing more vile for any government to do than to separate parents from their children. In fact, that is really what we're talking about. You know, we talk about deportation, detention, discrimination, but at the very core of what's going on, and this is something that anybody who understands slavery understands, that busting up a family is the way that you subjugate any population or keep them subjugated. And if you look at the conversations that are coming out of the White House right now, General John Kelly, who spent, before he ended up in the White House as a general, he spent his time in Latin America, you know, meeting with dictators and wannabe dictators, you know, to, quote, solve the drug war, which has caused devastation, continues to cause devastation in Latin America to this day. Just the other day asked him about Dreamers, and he says, well, we're going to go and cut a deal for the wall for $1.8 million because a lot of these Dreamers didn't sign up because they're a bunch of lazy asses. I paraphrase, but that's basically, he revealed how he believes that these folks from Latin America, which he knows really well, really aren't contributors. He does not believe that they are contributors to society, when there are studies out there all over the place showing that the unemployment rate among Dreamers is like 0, and they're constantly contributing to society and paying taxes. But in the White House, John Kelly says they're a bunch of lazy asses because only half of them, you know, trusted the government to give all their information about where they live, where they work, etc. And that database is threatening, is a dangerous database, because the Dreamers trusted the Obama government to give that information, and now this database could be abused, even though supposedly there are court protections on it. You have a gentleman in the White House called Stephen Miller, who, pardon me? Well, I mean, okay, a person, a poor excuse for a person called Stephen Miller, who, frankly, every time that, because Trump is just totally, spontaneously stupid, okay, and idiotic. And so, a couple of times Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer have said, and Dianne Feinstein have said, how about a clean DREAM Act? And he's going, oh yeah, what's wrong with that? And within, days of Trump agreeing to do something real about the Dreamers, all of a sudden it gets dismantled by Kelly and Miller. And so you have to ask yourself, what is really going on? Is there really a white supremacist clique in the White House? What do you think? And so what we're dealing here is really not that, quote, people want to do comprehensive, in the White House, comprehensive immigration reform. What they're really doing is carrying out an agenda where they feel threatened by the fact that the largest immigrant group in the United States are Mexicans, and that a lot of them vote and take control of a lot of elections. Just like in Alabama, where African American women basically took a red state and flipped it in the U.S. Senate. What is going on is the control of the Senate and Congress, and a lot of these places will be flipped by not only the Latino community, but by people who like the Latino community and are going to vote, in sympathy and in support and in alliance with the Latino community. So it's all about political power. And what you have to understand about political power, and I'm sure my colleagues here would agree, is that sometimes we confuse the transfer of political power, not understanding what we're involved in. I mean, we hear stand up, fight back. It's a fight. But what kind of a fight is it? Is it a debate or is it a war? Are we involved in a public policy debate or are we involved in a war? It's a war. It's a war that could be characterized as class war. It's a war against Mexicans. It's a war against immigrants. It's a war against young students that were brought to this country and have become students and workers and contributors. And the one phrase that is feared the most among Republican circles, especially Paul Ryan in the House and Mitch McConnell, is they want a pathway to citizenship. That is a very scary element because it means that those who serve, corporate greed, their days are numbered every time you add 1 million more voters that are not going to see things their way. And how do they react? Do they react politely? No, they react like you do with an enemy. They react with ICE. They react with Christian. What's the name of the ICE director? No, the Department of Homeland Security. Christian Nielsen. You react with her in front of Congress saying, "Hey, if someone is here and they're not supposed to be here, I'm going to deport them." She doesn't care whether they have a criminal record or not. Just wants to be able to get rid of them. You mentioned the ICE director coming to Sacramento. 200 folks arrested in L.A. Just yesterday, Daryl Steinberg and Eric Guerra had a forum for the Fuel Network. There are preparations because there are going to be deportation raids. And how do you stop that? How do you stop this war against us? How do you fight back? And yes, it's good to know our rights. It's good to know that we can hand out, I noticed one of these cards where we can hand them out to people to protect themselves, not open the door, etc. But how do we really fight back? Well, one of the things that I'm very, very proud of is that back in 1989, I was approached by a bunch of priests and nuns to talk about Central American refugees and the fact that they were going around passing sanctuary resolutions in different cities. And within weeks of meeting with them, there was a raid at the Club Elegante in the Mission District in San Francisco. And I was a county supervisor at the time. And INS and the San Francisco Police Department surrounded the nightclub and for 4 hours kept everybody there just because they were brown. And it turned out that everybody had to prove that they were in the country legally. And if they didn't, of course, they were put on the bus for deportation. And I was concerned, what is the San Francisco Police Department doing this? And the only reason why you're doing it to this club is because it's a Latino club. And it turned out that there was like 7 city commissioners there. There were, you know, the planning commissioner was there, a police commissioner was there. I mean, all these commissioners were there, and it didn't matter. They were still treated, you know, like like criminals. They were treated like criminals, and it didn't matter. And it was only because they were brown. And so I told the religious at the time, I'm not going to do a sanctuary resolution. I'm going to do a sanctuary ordinance so that any city employee that violates the rights of an immigrant in San Francisco gets fired, because you don't get fired if you violate a resolution. Resolution is like a hope, but an ordinance is a law. And so I passed the first sanctuary ordinance in the country. And it was emulated into 300 cities since 1989. Now, I'll tell you, every time that there is a DUI that results in death and the driver is an undocumented person, I get phone calls about why, you know, are you enabling people to make, you know, to be criminals in this country. When Kathleen Steinle got killed in San Francisco, boy, I got the phone calls. Do you care to comment on this, right? So the sanctuary ordinance is also used as a weapon against those people who support it. I mean, we had to endure an hour-and-a-half State of the Union address where dreamers were correlated to MS-13, to Mara Salvatrucha. That was the image that was put out by the white supremacist White House, that the dreamers are somehow related to MS-13. And that kind of fake news, that type, but that type of assault, that type of racist branding of even the dreamers is something that has to spark outrage. One of the things that I found unbelievable recently was the pardon of Sheriff Joe Arpaio in Arizona. This man created concentration camps, humiliated immigrants, you know, that had been arrested for having a broken taillight, and was responsible for almost 50 deaths in the time that he ran and those camps and was sheriff of Arizona. And he gets pardoned by Trump. And I wrote an article at that time, and I said, if we don't speak out against this pardon, if we don't mobilize against this pardon, shame on us. I wrote an article, I said, every community college, every school district, school board, every city council, every board of supervisors, every possible public body, I don't care if it's a mosquito abatement district and they have a board, should pass a resolution condemning the pardon of Joe Arpaio and asking the International Court, The Hague, to prosecute him as a war criminal. And that still remains to be done. And the other thing that I said, comes out, whenever I get a message from Professor Elvia Perez, I see a nice little quote there from Cesar Chavez. Cesar, wherever you are, it's boycott time again. We need to boycott Exxon. Rex Tillerson came from Exxon. There's no more corporation that is so much linked to the Trump than Exxon. And no person that supports, everyone who supports the Dreamers should never buy, from Exxon, and other corporations should be identified that we must boycott and be done with. The other thing is, the last time that they wanted to do raids in California, a radio station run by on Spanish language radio, Piolín, called out people to the states, into the streets, and 1 million people came out into the streets in support of immigrant rights, of undocumented person. That needs to happen again, and it better happen soon, because what's going on right now is DACA expires on March 5th. On March 24th, there's going to be another bill to keep the government running, another must-do kind of pass. But between March 24th and the elections of November, and then hopefully a new Congress in 2019, there's this long gap where the Dreamers are absolutely vulnerable. And we can talk about being outraged, but unless we're willing to get out on the street, to support a boycott, to pass resolutions at the community college district, at the city councils, condemning all of this that is going on, you know what? ICE is going to be emboldened to do what they want. Now, California, thank God for California. Javier Becerra put out a warning to all employers that they will be fined if they cooperate with ICE in deporting people. And it's had an effect. Just 2 days ago, Trump said, or was it yesterday? Trump said, you know what? California and their sanctuary state, I hate it. And you know what? I'm going to take ICE out of California. I hope he does. You know why? Because ICE is already telling him that sanctuary state works. The reason why he is threatening that he's going to leave MS-13 to be able to come into California, because he's going to withdraw ICE, is because already he knows that California's what Jerry Brown and Attorney General Javier Becerra are doing, and what Darrell Steinberg is doing, and what the mayor of San Francisco is doing, and what the Eric Garcetti of LA, it's working. We are protecting our people. We're making it impossible for ICE to deport people, but we have to stay vigilant. We have to support the sanctuary state, as my colleagues here have said, because it is what creates something where all public employees do not violate the law. And that's how we're going to protect the Dreamers. The Dreamers often say, undocumented and unafraid. And that should be our motto too. We are all undocumented, and we should all be unafraid. And we should all put our lives on the line for the Dreamers, because as the quote that Professor Cepeda said, first they came after the socialists and the trade unionists, and then the Jews, and then there was nobody to speak for me. If we allow in this window between now and a new Congress for mass deportations in California, shame on us. We must be ready to boycott, to work, to stop work, to do whatever it takes, because otherwise our humanity will be lost. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. These are powerful people. They are informed. They are educated. It's what happens here. Don't miss the party. Don't miss the party of being informed, of knowing your rights so that we can proceed. It's time. I hate to be rude, but the clock says that we need to stop. There are questions, but perhaps if they stayed for a little bit, your questions and comments can be heard, but I need to wrap up the program. So if you'd like to stay and they would like to stay, I'm sure that they can do that along with Cesar and Jonathan. But you know that something like this doesn't happen by yourself. And so it's time to give it up. I need to say thank you to my African American brothers and sisters again who have sustained me and who have said, yes, that's how this started. Thank you to the president, to Christy Hart, to Dave Hindi, to Michelle, to Sarah in the media services. Thank you to Melissa Williams for setting up tables. Thank you to James, LRCFT, who always has our back and served us lunch today along with the Equity Pocket. Thank you, thank you. They're good people. Philip Androve, Christy Brown, my custodians, I love you. I love you. At night, they hold me up too. Thank you to the team. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Please.
And thanks
I
to
didn't
you,
do
Elvia.
this. They did it. They did it. Thank you very much. And even thank you to one that is absent that just had the baby, right? Right? He just had a baby not too long ago. So thank you to him too. But before you go, we have just humble gifts of appreciation. So would you please come when I bestow them from behalf of the team to you. Thank you so much.
I just would also like to thank all of you as an audience. Thank you for coming out and spending an afternoon with us today. And a special thanks to our students who helped set this up, who attended. This is one of the rare events at a college that allows faculty, classified staff, administrators, students to all blend together. So Andrea, Valerie, thank you guys very much for participating and being a part of this. Again, this does not have to be the last event like this. This is a part of the MLK Speaker Series here at Folsom Lake College, and this is designed. This speaker series is designed specifically to bring up topics that are important and relevant to equity and diversity, and in the memory of Dr. King, helping us strive towards freedom. So thank you all. Have a wonderful day.
Here is one. The words nation of immigrants were just removed from the U.S. Citizenship Immigration Service mission statement. Please comment. Today's news. Again, 3 words. Nation of immigrants were removed from the U.S. Citizenship Immigration Services mission statement. Please comment. Today's news.
You know, it doesn't surprise me. For those of you who have seen Tom Cotton's RAISE Act, for those of you who've seen the SAFE Act, those acts and those bills were designed to make America white again. They really reduce legal immigration almost by 50%. So to see those words, I am not surprised.
Thank you.
Well, I think the thing to say about that is there's a proclivity in this nation, unfortunately, that's why critical thinking is so important, to ignore facts. And Trump has said, do you believe me or do you believe the facts? This is a nation of immigrants. What else is it? I mean, it is, whether it stays in a piece of paper or whether it's removed, it is a fact. Otherwise, folks need to go to their original places of provenance. So the issue is their words, they're killing words, they're destructive words, but they are not what this country is about. And you can restate that more powerfully than having to remove 3 pieces of 3 words from some particular instrument.
I think that Mexico should respond, and I'm very proud to be married to a Mexicana. You know, in fact, I think we should find the United States government under Trump in violation of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And California and most of the Southwest should either be totally independent or go back to Mexican possession. If they're going to take that.
Okay, here's another one. What is a Clean Dream Act? A Clean Dream Act.
Rhonda, who fights for the Clean Dream Act, is without any border security. So a Clean Dream Act speaks specifically to DACA and DACA only. We don't talk about a border wall. We don't talk about getting rid of the diversity lottery. We don't talk about limiting family reunification. We want a clean dream bill, which would give a pathway to citizenship for our documented communities.
And not only that, we need to have in the Clean DACA Act something that protects the parents of DACA. DAPA was overturned by the courts, but in the next Congress we need to push for DACA Clean Act that protects DACA students, but also their parents, because otherwise you're still separating families. And I would like to say what I heard one dreamer say to me: either all of us or none of us.
Nice. Thank you.
Again, no added enforcement measures that threatens the safety and security of impacted individuals, right? And that includes the parents. So that's in a basic what the Clean Dream Act means.
Thank you. Please stay.
There's a really cool video. It's only 2 minutes long on our website on docublack.org. There's a video that explains what do we mean when we say what is a Clean Dream Act. And there's a video that really talks about the diversity visa program. You've heard us talk about it a couple times. It's a program that allots up to 50,000 visas for people who come from low admission countries, so countries that we don't have a lot of people of in this country. And in the past few years, over 40% of those visas have gone to African immigrants, so something that really affects the African immigrant community. But you often hear about it from the person who sits in the White House as, the lottery, how awful it is, but really it allows for people who otherwise don't have a chance to be able to come to the U.S. to be able to come. And in a lot of the proposals that have been in D.C., it is called for an elimination of the diversity visa program. So for us, for Undocu Black, when we say a Clean Dream Act, we mean no border wall. Yes, we mean no interior enforcement. Yes, we mean no additional money for detention centers. But we also mean no cuts to the diversity visa program.
Thank you. Another one that kind of ties into part of the content in your answer is, what are the demographics of the 11.2 million undocumented persons? So anybody can answer that. Are they mostly from here, mostly from there, mostly? What are the demographic? Yeah, I know. What are the demographics of the 11.2?
Migration Policy Institute, MPI, has a lot of that information, so you can definitely go into MPI to find it, to look at that information. The Pew Institute has that information specifically. The populations are largely Latino, but we are very diverse, and we're proud of that diversity. And that's why the diversity lottery and the family reunification plans are so important in what we say and do and support.
Okay. For the Zapatistas, Zapatista Subcomandante Marcos said in 1994 that the Zapatistas rose up in rebellion so that no Mexican would ever have to leave their homeland in order to survive. Immigrants from Mexico are still coming in order to survive. I hope you also talk about the good stuff in the coffee.
Yes.
There's so much to talk about in terms of the Zapatistas, but let me put it this way: the Zapatistas are also part of the movement in Mexico of indigenous peoples. The Zapatistas themselves are primarily indigenous peoples. Subcomandante, who has changed his name from Marcos to Galeano now, also We don't call him Subcomandante Marcos anymore. But he's pointing out, as I was commenting on the poverty, the structural poverty in Mexico is so tremendous. The minimum wage in Mexico is $5 a day, not an hour, a day. And the prices of food are pretty much similar to here in the United States. So it's a brutal situation with the more than half of the country living in poverty, and of course the indigenous communities living in the most abject poverty of all. So sadly, there are tens of thousands of immigrants in the United States from the state of Chiapas, in spite of the fact that that's where the Zapatistas are. And even within Mexico and other places that I didn't have a chance to, one of the places I was able to visit is the farm workers that are starting an organization, a new syndicate in Baja California, among the people who work for Driscoll's. I don't know if you've heard about the Driscoll's boycott, but again, no recognition of their union, which they started 2 years ago, and no grower has sat down with them to negotiate a contract. So again, the situation is dire, and even within Mexico, like in Baja California, there's a lot of people from other states in Mexico, from Chiapas, from Oaxaca, from all over Mexico, that people have to migrate and travel even within their own country, not coming to the U.S. in order to find jobs at which they are exploited. Women are sexually harassed and violated, and so on. Elvia asked me to just mention the Zapatistas, although they're poor farmers primarily, living in remote parts of Mexico. They did a splendid gesture last year in donating 3,000 pounds of coffee grown and raised and roasted and packaged.
Kilos,
3,000 kilos, okay, sorry. double that, okay? A kilo is 2.2 pounds. But they gave that as a gift to us here in the United States so that we could sell it, and with the money we raised from the sale of that coffee, we could do activities in support of immigrants and refugees.
Wrap your mind around that. These are poor working farmers that send, these are Arabica beans, like the best in the world, and they sent them saying, here, help our people, help those in need. That's tremendous. That blows me away every time.
They have done that for other countries. They sent aid to Cuba, to different things, as part of a recognition that these problems don't belong to any one country, and that we have to learn to look beyond our borders and see ourselves as a human race worldwide.
Thank you, Mario. If DACA goes to the Supreme Court, how will that decision impact other immigrant statuses?
Well,
all right, okay. It was answered. If you want follow-up, maybe you can, send them a line.
May I just comment?
Yes, absolutely.
I just want to point out that the Supreme Court we have is another part of this government, just like our present Congress and the White House, that is essentially anti-human. The Supreme Court has said that corporations are people. Like, oh, well, there's a new race. There's the corporate race, who have the same rights as individuals, and our Supreme Court also says that money is a form of speech. So because we believe in free speech, that's why our electoral system now is flooded with money from people like the Koch brothers and that hedge fund manager I told you about who made $7 billion in 1 year. Our government is sold out to this flood of money that's coming in thanks to Supreme Court decision. So the Supreme Court is not ours. It's not defending us. So I wouldn't be very hopeful.
Jim.
Just some data points. We have two courts, one in California and one in New York, that have basically kept DACA in place. And so on March 5th, those court orders will still allow people to do renewals and things like that. So But the Trump government has asked the Supreme Court to intervene and immediately overturn what these courts did. And the chances of that are zero. That hasn't happened in 30 years. Okay? So the chances of the Supreme Court actually taking up this case are pretty remote.
You know, we work with the Sacramento Immigration Coalition, the three of us. We do Know Your Rights training, we do Legal Observer training, but we do DACA workshops. And we have raised money for the renewals because that is a significant reason many people cannot renew their DACA is they cannot pay that $495 fee. But we do those. So, and we are encouraging people to apply soon. So if any of you would like, if this college wants to do a DACA renewal workshop, we will come out and do that. If you need money to apply for that, let us know. We still have some money raised that we raised locally in California, and that, you know, Mission Assets Funds, I think, is still now again has money again. They ran out of funds, but we will help you get that fee paid, and we will help you with the application process, even if your renewal is more than 6 months before it ends, or if you have even more than 15 months, we will have lawyers present that you haven't had it renewed for over 15 months. We will help you with that.
And speaking of stand up and fight back, Rhonda forgot to mention we're also doing a civil disobedience training coming up here. Great. So.
Great. See Rhonda for more information. Perhaps this is a good one to end with. As educators and students, how can we get our more conservative peers to see the true issues of DACA and push back against taught stereotypes? As educators and students, how can we get our more conservative peers to see the true issues of DACA and push back against taught stereotypes?
Did you? Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So there are events such as these. And while I am extremely glad and blessed by the fact that you are here, there are many of you that aren't. One thing you could do immediately, you know, see all dash, each one teach one. Don't leave this workshop without touching at least one other person. When you fight racism and stereotypes, it is usually the issue of the other. You don't know what they look like. They're dehumanized. They're a figure or a fact or a statistic. When we talked about racism, particularly in dealing with children, the most effective way is to sit next to another person, regardless of color, and get to know the heart of that human being. It might seem small, but it's powerful. So that issue, along with more orchestrated events like this one, and not having you leave this workshop thinking, great, I've learned something, but in fact may mean nothing if you do nothing. Identify something. You can multiply what you've learned here today by tenfold. Do that, please, because that's what students can do. And by the way, students are the most powerful individuals on a campus. You may not believe that, but you have a right to identify the curriculum, the training, and even to sit on faculty evaluations, right? Yes.
Yes.
Own that and go for it.
So without doubt, I think it's, to echo what's just been said, students on campuses have immense power. Harness that energy. We've seen nationally and in specific states, students leading this movement. They're the reasons why even DACA was created in the first place. And so we have to follow their lead, continue to fight. So take the information that you get that was out on the resource table, share it with those colleagues. I'm proud to represent the American Federation of Teachers. We represent 1.7 million educators throughout the continuum of public education. And so our locals are having these courageous conversations because it is once again, our moral obligation to ensure that we are responding to the unique needs of all of our students and our own colleagues. So I want to give a shout out also to the Los Rios College Federation of Teachers, who is the AFT local here in the area. Again, Elvia, thank you for opening this space. It's important that we continue to have these conversations. One of the resources that I brought today is an updated fact sheet on DACA, what it means for faculty and graduate employees, but I also mentioned the nationwide injunctions. So please take that. Again, it's updated information. Share it so that people have the latest information so that we don't do this work recklessly, that we do it holistically and holding everybody accountable. So thank you.
We also.
Yes, Jim and Rhonda.
Yeah, I just want to trigger on the fact that the reason why we have DACA, for 3 years, the Dreamers asked President Obama to use an executive order. And he kept on saying that really he didn't want to do it. It wasn't really an effective thing to use executive orders for immigration. And so finally, the Dreamers, even though there had been hunger strikes in front of the White House and everything, finally, when President Obama was running for re-election, Dreamers went and did a sit-in at the Obama headquarters in Colorado and basically said, we are going to sit in every one of your headquarters in battleground states until you do something. Well, within 24 hours, DACA was announced, all right? And in dealing here in California, we have 14 seats that were won by Hillary Clinton, but right now have a Republican representative. The DACA students are visiting each one of them, and that's why Jeff Denham, the one in Modesto, who has never been a friend, is now talking about he supports some type of a Dreamer clean bill and all that. So if we really want to do something, I think we need to really focus on these congressional races here in California. And when we hear that the Dreamers are having a Saturday, demonstration in front of these folks, right here in one of these districts is here, Tom McClintock. Tom McClintock is somebody that needs to be educated, and I think that he would be very stunned if he had people from Folsom Lake College also join the Dreamers at his office on one of these Saturdays.
I agree.
And all those actions by the Dreamers, in fact, they used John Lennon as a reason why he could actually do DACA, deferred action, because John Lennon had deferred action, but that sitting in were acts of civil disobedience. So I want to tell you about 4 days. So March 5th, obviously you've heard March 5th is that date. So we will have an action in front of the federal building, which is where ICE is located. It is called Save TPS, Defend DACA, No More Wall. And that will be from 5 to 6:30 in front of the federal building. So bring yourself, bring 10 people, and stand with us. The very next day, we will do the same thing, except it will be ICE out of Sacramento. Do not sign and renew that ICE contract. Sheriff Jones is proposing. The third day will be at the Maple Neighborhood Center, which is 3301 37th Avenue, and that's civil disobedience preparedness training. The fourth day will be a faith circle where we'll have a number of congregations coming together back again at the federal building, asking people to stand and give witness 5 to 6:30. So 4 activities that you can join us.
Viva la causa.
Viva la causa. Join me in a...
May I add
Yes,
last
yes,
thought?
yes.
I just want to say that it's important for us to not just talk to the people on our side. We have to cross the fence and go to the other side. I just want to share something I saw on one of the TED Talks, one of my favorite things to watch online. And this woman was talking, and she was from, I believe it's called the Emmanuel Baptist Church or whatever. They're the ones who protest, at abortion clinics and something. From childhood, she was raised in this strict religious training, et cetera, and amazingly, through some friends she made on Facebook, she started talking with them, and they would ask her questions about, so why do you do this, and so on, and then actually they actually started, some of them started coming to the protests where she and her church group were protesting to talk with her in person, and they would just point out contradictions, like if we're a Christian nation, how can we be treating people like this? How can we be having this tremendous war budget and everything? And amazingly, she finally saw the light and left the church. So, I mean, even someone who's indoctrinated from childhood can be reached, just through friendship, not through, why are you doing it? But through concern, through a loving approach. And I think all of us can do that, even if we're not making it to all the demonstrations and marches and everything. We can talk to our neighbors and just make a human-to-human appeal for the better world that we all hope for.
That's a great note to end on. Would you please join me in an applause to say thank you to our guests, and viva la causa, on we go. Do not forget, don't miss the party.